Hello, and welcome to Mythos and Logos. Every year, like clockwork ordained by the gods themselves, the impossible happened. The desert, that vast ocean of death stretching to eternity in all directions, would surrender a thin ribbon of its domain to life. Not gradually, not tentatively, but in a rush of brown water, carrying the rich black soil of distant mountains. Where there had been cracked earth and dust, there would be fields of green grain. Where there had been famine's spectre, there would be abundance. This miracle, this annual resurrection of the land, gave birth to a civilization that would endure for over 3,000 years. The Egyptians called their country Kemet, the Black Land, for that precious dark silt deposited each year by the Nile's flood. Everything beyond the river's gift was Deshret, the Red Land, the desert's burning emptiness, where only death waited. Between these two absolutes, between the black and the red, between life and oblivion, the ancient Egyptians built a world unlike any other. They built monuments that still stand after 45 centuries. They developed writing, mathematics, medicine, and monumental architecture. They created a conception of the afterlife so elaborate that it consumed much of their civilization's energy and wealth. They gave the world the very image of timeless grandeur, the pyramid, and they gave us the enduring mystery of the Pharaoh, the god who walked among mortals. Tonight, we will follow this extraordinary civilization from its humble origins in scattered farming villages along the Nile to the age of the great pyramid builders. We will witness the unification of Egypt under divine kings and explore what it meant to be ruled by a god made flesh. We will stand in the shadow of monuments built to last forever and consider the minds that dreamed such permanence into being. Before we begin our journey, may I ask for your help? Liking and subscribing takes just a moment, but makes a huge difference for the channel. I'm grateful for your consideration. I'm also always amazed by our international reach, so I'd appreciate hearing where you're joining from and your local time. As the present fades to whispers, we find ourselves transported to the narrow green valley of the Nile, 3,500 years before the birth of Christ, where the air shimmers with heat and the great river flows eternal, bringing life to a land that would otherwise know only sand and stone and the silence of endless desert. Before the crowns, the story begins long before there were pharaohs, before there were crowns or thrones or the elaborate rituals of divine kingship. It begins with people following the rains. Around 7,000 BC, the Sahara was not yet the absolute desert it would become. Seasonal rains fell across what is now trackless waste. Lakes dotted the landscape. Grasslands supported herds of wild cattle and antelope, and in this greener world, nomadic peoples hunted and gathered, following the patterns of precipitation and the movements of game. But the rains were failing, gradually, inexorably, across the course of centuries. The grasslands withered, the lakes shrank and vanished. The game migrated or died, and the people who had lived in this diminishing Eden were forced to choose, retreat southward or gather along the one water source that never failed, the great river that cut through the wasteland like a promise. They chose the river. They had no other choice. By 5,000 BC, permanent settlements lined the Nile. The people who would become the Egyptians were learning to master the flood, to predict its arrival, to channel its waters, to plant in its wake. They were domesticating wheat and barley, raising cattle and pigs and goats. They were making pottery of increasing sophistication, crafting tools of polished stone, weaving linen from flax that grew in their irrigated fields. They were burying their dead with care, with grave goods that suggest they already believed in some form of continued existence beyond this life. Archaeologists call this period the Naqada culture, named for a site in Upper Egypt, where evidence of these early people was first systematically excavated. The Naqada peoples left us pottery, decorated with boats and animals and human figures. They left us evidence of trade networks extending into Nubia to the south and the Levant to the northeast. They left us the earliest hints of social hierarchy in the size and elaboration of their tombs. Some graves contain far more goods than others, far more evidence of wealth and status. Already, even before the first pharaohs, Egyptian society was stratifying, organizing itself into layers of power and prestige. By 3300 BC, something more complex was emerging. The scattered villages were coalescing into larger political units. Chieftains were becoming kings. Small territories were consolidating into kingdoms. Two main centers of power were forming. One in the delta region of Lower Egypt, where the Nile fans out into multiple channels before meeting the Mediterranean, as a sect, and one in the river valley of Upper Egypt, stretching south toward Nubia. These two regions would develop distinct identities, distinct patron deities, distinct crowns. Lower Egypt wore the red crown, the deshret. Upper Egypt wore the white crown, the hedjet. And in the tombs of this period, we begin to find something new: hieroglyphs. Not yet the full writing system that would develop over the coming centuries, but proto-writing, symbolic representations of concepts and sounds. The Egyptians were learning to capture thought itself, to make it visible and permanent. They were learning to speak to the future. The villages along the Nile had no way of knowing that they stood on the threshold of something unprecedented. They could not know that their descendants would build monuments that would still stand when humanity reached for the stars. They could not imagine that the political unification about to occur would create a state structure so successful it would endure, in one form or another, for 31 centuries. They simply lived their lives, planted their crops, raised their children, and worshipped their gods, while the great forces of history moved them toward a convergence. That convergence was coming. War was brewing between the two kingdoms, between Upper and Lower Egypt. And from that conflict would emerge the institution that would define this civilization: the Pharaoh, the living god, the divine king who embodied both the red land and the black, both Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt, both the earthly realm and the divine. You stand at the river's edge. You stand at the river's edge in the soft light of dawn, 3,200 years before the birth of Christ, and you are waiting for the god to arrive. The fields around you are cracked and dry. The previous harvest exhausted the soil months ago. The sun has baked the earth hard as pottery. Your feet, bare and calloused, stand in dust that was once mud. Behind you, your family sleeps in a house of mud, brick and reeds, a simple structure of 2 rooms that your grandfather built and your father maintains. Your wife lies on a reed mat, with your 2 children beside her. Your 3rd child, a daughter, died last year when the flood came late and the harvest was poor. You do not like to think of her small body, wrapped in linen, placed in the dry ground of the desert's edge. But this year will be different. You can feel it. You watch the northern horizon, where the river curves out of sight. The sky there is still dark, but lightning, somewhere beyond your vision, beyond the next village and the next. The flood is coming. You have been watching for signs for days now. The priests have been watching for longer. They measure the river with marked stones. They consult their records from previous years. They read the stars and calculate. And 3 days ago, the word came down river. The inundation approaches. Happy, the god of the flood, is returning to bless the 2 lands. You hear it before you see it, a change in the river's voice. Normally, at this time of year, the Nile whispers, sluggish and low, revealing broad banks of dried mud. But now you hear a deeper sound, a rumble, a purposeful flowing. You see the water level rising against the reeds. The colour is changing from the clear blue-green it has been all summer to a rich brown, the colour of life itself. Your heart quickens. You turn and call to your wife, to your children, to your neighbours. Within moments, the whole village is emerging into the early light. You all stand together, watching the miracle arrive. The water rises steadily, inexorably. It spreads beyond the normal banks. It creeps across the parched fields. It brings with it not just water, but soil, the precious black earth from far away, from the highlands where the great river is born. You can smell it, rich and fertile, full of promise. You can see it in the water, a suspension of dark particles that will settle across your fields and make them new again. You wade into the rising flood, feeling its coolness against your sun-heated skin. The water is chest-deep now in places where yesterday there was only dust. You run your hands through it, lift them, watch the brown water stream between your fingers. This is Happy's gift. This is the source of all life in the 2 lands. Without this annual resurrection, there would be nothing. The desert would claim everything. But the God is faithful, year after year, with a regularity that proves the cosmic order. The flood returns. In a few weeks, when the waters recede, you will plant. You will press barley seeds into the soft black mud. You will watch the green shoots emerge. You will tend them through the growing season, protecting them from birds and gazelles, irrigating them from channels you dig from the river. And at harvest time, you will reap grain enough to feed your family, with surplus to pay in taxes, to the local administrator, who serves the regional governor, who serves the pharaoh, who serves the gods themselves. This is the rhythm of your life, the rhythm of Egypt itself. Inundation, planting, growing, harvest, death and rebirth, the old year ending and the new year beginning. You are part of a pattern larger than yourself, a pattern that mirrors the cosmos. The sun dies each night and is reborn each dawn. Osiris died and was resurrected. The land dies each summer and is reborn when the flood arrives. Your role is to maintain this pattern, to work in harmony with it, to uphold Ma'at, the divine order that keeps chaos at bay. You look south, toward Upper Egypt, toward the distant temples, where the pharaoh himself performs the great rituals that ensure the flood will come. You have never seen the pharaoh, you never will, but you know he is there, interceding with the gods on behalf of all the people, maintaining the balance between the human world and the divine. He is Horus in living form. The gods speak through him. Through his rituals, the cosmos functions properly. Through his power, the flood arrives on time. The water is still rising. Your children splash and laugh, delighting in the transformation of their familiar world into something magical. Your wife stands beside you, her hand finding yours. Last year's sorrow is still there, will always be there, but this year brings hope again. The God has returned. Life begins anew. The unification. Around 3100 BC, a king whose name has come down to us as Narmer, though he may have also been called Menes, accomplished something that would shape the next 3,000 years of human history. He unified Upper and Lower Egypt under a single crown. We know of this unification primarily from a single remarkable artifact, the Narmer palette, a shield-shaped piece of carved slate, roughly 2 feet tall, discovered at Hierakonpolis in 1897 AD. Both sides of this palette are covered with relief carvings, and these carvings tell the story of conquest and unity. On one side, Narmer wears the white crown of Upper Egypt. He is depicted as a giant compared to the other figures, for he is not merely a man, but a god incarnate. His arm is raised, holding a mace, about to strike a kneeling captive whom he grips by the hair. Above the victim, a falcon, the god Horus, perches on a clump of papyrus, the plant of Lower Egypt, and the symbolism is clear. Horus, the divine patron of kingship, has delivered Lower Egypt into Narmer's hands. Below the main scene, 2 bearded men flee, and hieroglyphic symbols identify them as defeated enemies. On the palette's reverse side, Narmer wears the red crown of Lower Egypt. He processes with his officials and standard-bearers to inspect the decapitated bodies of his enemies, their severed heads placed between their legs. The message is unambiguous. Lower Egypt has been conquered, and Narmer now rules both lands. But the Narmer palette shows us more than military victory. It shows us the invention of a new kind of kingship. From this moment forward, the ruler of Egypt would wear both crowns, combined into the double crown called the Pshent. He would be known as the Lord of the Two Lands. He would carry titles reflecting both regions, King of Upper and Lower Egypt, he of the Sedge and the Bee. Every aspect of pharaonic regalia and titulary would emphasize this duality, this union of two into one. Narmer established his capital at Memphis, at the junction point between Upper and Lower Egypt, where the river valley meets the delta. Memphis would remain Egypt's administrative capital through most of the Old Kingdom. Its very location embodied the unified state, neither fully of the south nor fully of the north, but balance between them. Yet unification was more than political consolidation. It represented the imposition of cosmic order, of Ma'at, over the chaos that threatened when the land was divided. A divided Egypt violated the natural order, the way things were meant to be according to divine plan. The pharaoh's role, established here at the very beginning, was to maintain unity, to keep the two lands functioning as one, to prevent the fracturing that would allow chaos, isfet, to creep back in. The concept of ma'at would become fundamental to Egyptian civilization. It meant truth, justice, harmony, cosmic order. It was both a principle and a goddess. The pharaoh wore her feather as part of his crown. He upheld her through his actions, his rituals, his administration of justice. As long as Ma'at prevailed, the sun would rise, the Nile would flood, and Egypt would prosper. But if Ma'at failed, if injustice and disorder took hold, then the cosmic machinery itself might falter. This is why Nama's unification mattered so profoundly. He was not simply conquering territory, he was restoring the proper order of things. He was making the two lands whole again, as they were meant to be, as the gods intended. And in doing so, he established a template for kingship that would endure long after the pyramids themselves had become ancient. The kings who followed Nama would sometimes struggle to maintain unity. Egypt would fracture during intermediate periods when central authority collapsed. But always, the memory of unification would call the land back together. Always, some pharaoh would rise to reunify the two lands and restore Ma'at. The unification was not merely a historical event, but a founding myth, a perpetual aspiration, a definition of what Egypt was supposed to be. And from this moment of unification emerged something else unprecedented: the institution of divine kingship on a scale never before attempted in human civilization, the God who walks among us. To understand ancient Egypt is to understand this fundamental fact. The pharaoh was not simply a king who claimed divine favor or divine descent. He was not a priest who ruled. He was, quite literally, in Egyptian theology, a god in human form, as real and present as the statues in the temples, as powerful as the sun itself. The pharaoh was the living Horus. This identification was absolute. Horus, the falcon god, son of Osiris and Isis, rightful king of the gods, inhabited the body of each pharaoh. When the pharaoh spoke, Horus spoke. When the pharaoh acted, Horus acted. The pharaoh's Horus name was the first and most important of his 5 official names, and it was written in a sarek, a stylized palace facade surmounted by the Horus falcon. But the pharaoh's divinity did not end with Horus. He was also associated with Re, the sun god, particularly in later periods. He was the son of Re, born of the sun itself. Some texts describe the sun god taking the form of the reigning pharaoh in order to father the next pharaoh with the queen, ensuring the divine bloodline continued unbroken. The pharaoh's physical body might be human, but his ka, his vital essence, his life force, was divine. This concept of the ka is crucial. Every person had a ka, but the pharaoh's ka was unique, transmitted from father to son in an unbroken chain reaching back to the gods themselves. The ka was what made him more than human, what gave him the power to mediate between the earthly realm and the divine realm. Through his ka, the pharaoh could communicate with the gods as an equal, could perform rituals that sustained cosmic order, could ensure that Ma'at prevailed over Isfet. The pharaoh also possessed a ba, often translated as soul or personality, which could travel after death. His name, his ren, held power and had to be protected and perpetuated. His shadow, his shut, was a distinct aspect of his being, and his body, his ket, had to be preserved after death so that all these elements could reunite in the afterlife. This complex understanding of personhood applied to all Egyptians, but for the pharaoh it had cosmic significance. What did this divine kingship mean in practice? It meant the pharaoh was responsible for maintaining the entire cosmic order. Each morning, in temple rituals performed throughout Egypt, the pharaoh, through his priests acting as his representatives, opened the sanctuary, awakened the god statue, bathed it, clothed it, anointed it, fed it, and sealed the sanctuary again. These rituals were not optional ceremonies. They were essential maintenance of reality itself. Without them, The gods might withdraw their favor. The sun might not rise. The Nile might not flood. Chaos might overwhelm creation. The pharaoh did not govern in the way we think of governance today. He did not make policy in response to changing circumstances. He maintained eternal patterns. His job was not to innovate but to preserve, not to change but to perpetuate, not to create new order, but to uphold the order established at the moment of creation. Innovation happened, of course. Egypt changed over 3 millennia. But these changes were always presented as returns to ancient tradition, as restorations of the way things had always been, never as new ideas. This is why the pharaoh's person was sacred beyond measure. To see him directly, without proper ritual preparation, could be dangerous, even fatal. His urine and feces were handled with elaborate care, for they contained residue of divine essence. His birthday was a national celebration, for it marked the arrival of a god among mortals. His death was a catastrophe that threatened to unravel the cosmos, quickly resolved only when his car passed to his successor and the divine line continued unbroken. The pharaoh owned Egypt, literally and absolutely. All land was his. All people were his. The temples were his. The crops, the animals, the very Nile itself belonged to him by divine right. He could not be questioned, for to question him was to question the gods. He could not be wrong, for he was the source and measure of truth. His word was ma'at, made manifest. And yet, paradoxically, the pharaoh was also constrained by ma'at. He could not act arbitrarily, for that would violate the cosmic order he was meant to uphold. He had to be the perfect king, the perfect priest, the perfect warrior, the perfect administrator. The burden of godhood was absolute. Under such kings, such divine beings made flesh, the Egyptians would build monuments to rival the mountains themselves. The dream in stone. Around 2650 BC, a pharaoh named Djoser sat on the throne of the two lands during the Third Dynasty, and he had a problem that all pharaohs eventually faced: where and how to build his tomb. His predecessors had been buried under mastabas, flat-topped rectangular structures of mud brick built over underground burial chambers. These mastabas grew progressively larger and more elaborate, but they were still, fundamentally, low mounds claiming modest stretches of the desert. Djoser wanted something different. He wanted something that would establish his eternal presence in a way that could not be ignored or forgotten. He wanted a tomb that would reach toward the heavens, toward Re, his divine father. And to realize this unprecedented vision, he turned to a man who would become one of history's first named architects, first engineers, first geniuses, whose name would outlive his mortal form: Imhotep. Imhotep held many titles. He was high priest of Re at Heliopolis. He was Djoser's vizier, the highest administrative official in the kingdom. He was a physician whose medical knowledge would, in later centuries, lead to his deification as a god of healing. But his greatest achievement, the innovation that changed Egypt forever, was architectural. Imhotep proposed something radical: to build in stone, not mud brick; to build tall, not merely wide; to build a structure that would rise in 6 great steps toward the sky, each level smaller than the one below, creating a massive stone stairway that the pharaoh's bar could climb to reach the sun god in the heavens. The step pyramid of Djoser at Saqqara was revolutionary on multiple levels. First, there was the sheer technical achievement of working in stone on such a scale. Earlier structures had used stone sparingly, for doorways or pillars, but the bulk of construction had been mud brick. Imhotep designed a monument of limestone blocks, over 2 million cubic feet of stone, precisely cut and fitted. The base measured approximately 370 feet by 410 feet. The pyramid rose 200 feet above the desert floor, 6 stepped levels ascending to the sky. But the pyramid itself was only the beginning. Imhotep designed an entire funerary complex surrounding it. A rectangular enclosure wall of fine white limestone, 33 feet high, stretched for over a mile around the pyramid. This wall contained only one true entrance, a doorway that led to a colonnade of 40 columns, the first known stone columns in history. These columns were engaged to the walls, not freestanding, because Imhotep, working in an entirely new medium, was not yet certain of stone's structural capabilities. He was learning as he built, inventing techniques that had never existed before. Beyond the colonnade lay courtyards, chapels, dummy buildings that existed only as facades with rubble fill, architectural features carved in stone to replicate the organic forms of earlier reed and wood construction. The ceilings were carved to look like logs. The columns were shaped like bundled papyrus stalks. Imhotep was translating the vocabulary of temporary materials into the permanence of stone, creating in eternal form what had previously existed only in perishable media. Beneath the pyramid stretched a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers carved deep into the bedrock. The burial chamber itself lay at the bottom of a 28-meter vertical shaft. Thousands of stone vessels were placed in the underground galleries, provisions for the pharaoh's afterlife. Blue faience tiles covered some chamber walls, creating underground rooms of startling beauty that no living eye was meant to see once the burial was complete. The engineering challenges were immense. Moving blocks weighing several tons across the desert required sophisticated understanding of levers, rollers, ramps, and human organization. Thousands of workers had to be fed, housed, managed. Quarries had to be opened. Stone had to be transported, sometimes from distant sites. The logistics alone represented an unprecedented achievement in human cooperation and planning. But Imhotep was solving more than engineering problems. He was creating a theological architecture, a built environment that expressed in three-dimensional form the Egyptian understanding of death, resurrection, and eternal life. The pyramid was not merely a tomb, it was a resurrection machine, a device for transforming the dead pharaoh into an a transfigured spirit that could ascend to the heavens and join the circumpolar stars that never set, the imperishable ones that wheeled eternally around the north celestial pole. The step design itself carried meaning. Each level was a stage in the pharaoh's ascent. The pyramid was a stairway to heaven, a solidified ray of sunlight, a physical manifestation of the ramp the sun god used to descend to earth at dawn and ascend to the sky at dusk. To build such a structure was to recreate the primordial mound that emerged from the waters of chaos at creation, the first solid land on which the creator god stood to begin the work of making the world. After Djoser's death and successful burial, his step pyramid stood complete, visible for miles across the desert, an achievement without precedent in human history, and it inspired an ambition that would consume Egyptian civilization for the next century, to build taller, grander, more perfect pyramids that would establish the pharaoh's eternal presence in monuments that could withstand the erosion of millennia. Imhotep had shown what was possible. Now others would perfect his vision, ascending to eternity. My name is Kenti, and I am a stoneworker on the Great Pyramid of Khufu, and I am part of something that will last forever. I was not always a builder. For most of the year, I am a farmer in a village 3 days' journey north of here, near the delta. I plant barley and emmer wheat in fields my family has worked since my grandfather's grandfather's time. But for 4 months each year, during the inundation, when the fields are underwater and there is no farm work to do, I come here to Giza to work on the pharaoh's eternal house. This is my 3rd season on the project. The overseers tell us the pyramid will take 20 years to complete. We are in the 8th year now, and already the structure rises higher than any building I have ever seen or imagined. The base is so vast you cannot see from one corner to another. Each side measures roughly 740 feet and aligns almost perfectly with the cardinal directions. How the architects and astronomers achieved such precision, I do not fully understand, but I have watched them work with plumb lines and the stars, and I trust their sacred knowledge. I am part of a crew of 20 men. We work together, eat together, sleep together in the workers' village that has grown up near the construction site. The overseers are stern but fair. We are fed well, better than we eat at home. 3 times a day, we receive bread, beer, onions, and meat. The Pharaoh provides for us because we are building his gateway to eternity, and this is holy work. Our task this season is to help transport and position the limestone casing stones that will cover the pyramid's outer surface. These stones come from quarries across the Nile at Tura, where the limestone is finer and whiter than the local stone used for the pyramid's core. Each casing block weighs as much as several full-grown cattle. We move them on wooden sledges pulled by ropes, 50 men or more per sled, depending on the stone's weight. Overseers pour water on the sand ahead of the sledge to make it slide more easily. Getting the stones up the pyramid requires massive ramps. These ramps are engineering marvels themselves, built of mud, brick, and rubble, rising at gentle angles to whatever level is currently being built. Some ramps spiral around the pyramid's sides, others rise straight up one face. As the pyramid grows taller, the ramps must be extended and heightened. At the end of the project, these ramps will be dismantled and the material hauled away, but for now they are the roadways by which the pyramid rises. Yesterday, I helped position a casing stone on the pyramid's north face. 40 of us pulled the sledge up the ramp, chanting a work song to coordinate our efforts, our muscles burning, sweat streaming despite the relatively cool weather. At the top, specialized workers, the master masons, took over. They used wooden levers and measuring tools to position the stone with extraordinary precision. I watched them work and marveled at their skill. Each stone must fit against its neighbors so tightly that, they say, you will not be able to slide a knife blade between them when the work is complete. Some of the men grumble about the labor, about the time away from our families, about the muscle aches and rope burns on our hands. But I do not share their complaints. I am building the Pharaoh's eternal home. When Khufu dies and ascends to the heavens to join Re, his car will rest in this pyramid I am helping to build. My hands, my sweat, my strength are contributing to something that will endure long after my own body returns to dust. My descendants, hundreds of years from now, will see this pyramid and know that their ancestor helped build it. There is no slavery here, whatever stories might be told in future ages. We are farmers fulfilling our labor obligation to the Pharaoh, our divine king. We are craftsmen taking pride in our skills. We are men participating in the grandest religious project of our age. The Pharaoh is a god. Through him, Ma'at is maintained. Through his rituals, the Nile floods, the sun rises, order prevails over chaos. To ensure his proper burial, his successful journey to the afterlife, is to ensure the continued functioning of the cosmos itself. At night, after the work is done, I sometimes climb partway up the pyramid and look out across the desert. The sun sets red and gold beyond the Nile Valley. The desert stretches forever in the other direction, empty and silent. And I stand on this growing mountain of stone, this human-made peak in a flat landscape, and I feel part of something eternal. This pyramid will outlast kingdoms. It will outlast languages. When everything else we build has crumbled to dust, this will remain. That knowledge fills me with a pride that makes the labor worthwhile, that makes the time away from home feel like service to something greater than myself. I am Kenti, a farmer and a stoneworker, and I am building eternity. The pyramids rise. The fourth dynasty, roughly 2600, 13 to 2494 BC, represents the absolute zenith of pyramid building, the age when the pharaohs' ambitions and their civilization's capabilities aligned to create monuments that would define Egypt in the world's imagination forever. Khufu, called Cheops by the Greeks, built the Great Pyramid at Giza around 2560 BC. The numbers still stagger the mind. Originally 481 feet tall, it remained the tallest human structure on Earth for over 3,800 years. The base covers 13 acres. The structure contains approximately 2,300,000 blocks of stone, each averaging 2.5 tons, some weighing 15 tons or more. The precision of its construction remains remarkable. The base is level to within 1 inch, the sides aligned to the cardinal directions to within 3/60ths of a single degree. Inside, a complex system of passages and chambers reveals the theological purpose behind the architecture. The King's Chamber, built of enormous granite blocks transported from quarries 500 miles south at Aswan, contains the pharaoh's sarcophagus, a simple granite box designed to hold the mummified body. Above this chamber, 5 relieving chambers distribute the massive weight of stone above, preventing the collapse of the burial space. The ascending and descending passages, the grand gallery, with its corbelled ceiling rising to a height of nearly 29 feet, the mysterious, so-called Queen's Chamber, the strange narrow shafts pointing towards specific stars. All these elements served purposes, both practical and religious, that scholars still debate. But Khufu's pyramid was not built in isolation. It formed the centerpiece of a vast necropolis. Smaller pyramids for queens stood nearby. Mastaba tombs for nobles and officials spread out in neat rows like a city of the dead. A valley temple and mortuary temple, connected by a causeway, completed the funerary complex. Priests would maintain the pharaoh's cult here for centuries, performing daily rituals to sustain his ka in the afterlife. And the Great Pyramid was not alone even among pyramids at Giza. Khufu's son, Khafre, built the second pyramid at Giza, slightly smaller than his father's but built on higher ground, so its peak reaches nearly the same elevation. Khafre's pyramid retained some of its original smooth limestone casing at the top, giving us a glimpse of how all the pyramids looked when first completed. Gleaming white surfaces reflecting the sun, visible for miles, dominating the landscape with geometric perfection. Khafre also built or commissioned the Great Sphinx, that enigmatic monument of a lion's body with a pharaoh's head, carved from a natural limestone outcrop near his valley temple. The Sphinx measures 240 feet long and 66 feet high. Its purpose remains debated, whether guardian of the necropolis, representation of Rehorakti, or portrait of Khafre himself in leonine form. It stares east toward the rising sun, its features weathered by millennia, but still commanding, still majestic, still mysterious. Menkaure, Khafre's successor, built the third and smallest of the Giza pyramids, a mere 218 feet tall. But what Menkaure's pyramid lacks in size, it compensates in the quality of its materials. The lower courses were cased in red granite from Aswan, expensive and difficult to work, a display of wealth and power. These three pyramids, arranged in a diagonal line across the Giza plateau, with their associated temples, causeways, queen's pyramids, and noble tombs, represented the Old Kingdom at its absolute peak. The centralized power required to marshal the resources, organize the labor, maintain the food supply for thousands of workers, all while keeping the regular business of government and agriculture functioning, reveals a state operating at maximum efficiency. But the pyramids also reveal something about the Egyptian understanding of kingship and eternity. Each pharaoh built his own pyramid because each pharaoh was his own god, his own Horus, requiring his own eternal dwelling. The pyramid was not just a tomb, but a cult center where priests would maintain the royal ka forever. The pyramid proclaimed the pharaoh's power, his divine nature, his transcendence over death itself. The smooth-sided form that the pyramids had evolved into from Djoser's earlier step design carried deep symbolic meaning. The benben, the sacred stone at Heliopolis that represented the primordial mound of creation, was pyramidal in shape. A pyramid was a three-dimensional representation of the rays of the sun spreading down from heaven to earth. To be buried within a pyramid was to be enclosed in solidified sunlight, to be embraced by Re himself. These monuments consumed enormous resources. Modern estimates suggest the Great Pyramid required about 230,000 man-days of labor per year, over 20 years, meaning roughly 10,000 workers during the flood season when agricultural work was impossible. The economic surplus required to support such projects indicates a civilization of remarkable productivity and organizational sophistication, and yet the Pyramid Age would not last forever. The resources required were too vast. The centralized control necessary was too absolute. Already, even as Menkaure's pyramid rose, the seeds of the Old Kingdom's eventual collapse were being planted. But that collapse lay in the future. For now, at Giza, under the desert sun, the pyramids stood complete, eternal homes for god-kings, monuments that proclaimed Egypt's might to the ages. The desert remembers. Night falls across the Giza plateau, and silence settles over the monuments like fine sand. The moon rises, nearly full, painting the pyramids in silver light. Their limestone surfaces, mostly stripped away in later centuries, for building projects in Cairo, once gleamed white in just such moonlight, But even in their current weathered state, they remain majestic, remains unmistakable. The Great Pyramid's massive stepped core rises against the star-filled sky, geometry imposed on nature, human ambition made solid and permanent. The desert wind whispers around the stones, the same wind that blew when these monuments were new, the same wind that will blow when humanity is dust and memory. The sand shifts, always moving, always reshaping itself, patient in its work of reclaiming everything eventually. But not yet. Not yet. The pyramids have stood for 45 centuries. They will stand for centuries more. You can hear the silence here. It has texture and weight. The modern city of Cairo glows on the horizon, but here, in the necropolis, the ancient stillness persists. This is how it sounded when the priests performed their rituals, when they opened the temple doors at dawn to greet the sun god, when they fed the royal car and performed the ceremonies that sustained the divine order. The Sphinx gazes east, waiting for the dawn, as it has waited every night since the time of Khafre. Weathered and worn, mysterious and knowing, it keeps its eternal vigil. What has it witnessed across 4,500 years? Empires rising and falling, languages being born and dying, religions emerging and fading, the Nile flooding and receding, the heartbeat of Egypt continuing regardless of human drama. The stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance. The pharaohs who built these monuments believed they would join those circumpolar stars that never set, the imperishable ones, and perhaps in some sense they did. Their names are still spoken, their monuments still stand. They achieved a form of immortality, though perhaps not the one they imagined. The moonlight pools in the sand creates shadows deep as wells. The desert remembers everything and nothing, preserves everything and erodes everything, holds secrets and surrenders them slowly, grain by grain, to those patient enough to listen. The pyramids wait, solid and certain, monuments to ambition and faith and power, and the human need to leave something permanent behind when our brief time ends. They wait in the moonlight, and the silence, and the eternal patience of stone, the weight of the feather. At the very heart of Egyptian civilization lay a concept so fundamental, so all-encompassing, that every aspect of life and death oriented around it. The Egyptians called it ma'at, and though we translate the word variously as truth, justice, order, or balance, none of these captures its full meaning. Ma'at was the cosmic order established at creation, the fundamental pattern of reality itself, the principle that kept chaos at bay. Ma'at was both an abstract concept and a goddess, depicted as a woman wearing an ostrich feather on her head. That feather would become the most important object in the universe for any Egyptian who died. For in the afterlife, in the Hall of Two Truths, the heart of the deceased would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at. This was not metaphorical. The Egyptians believed it happened, literally. After death, after the dangerous journey through the underworld, avoiding demons and serpents and lakes of fire, the deceased would stand before Osiris, god of the dead and resurrected king of the underworld. 42 divine judges would preside. Anubis, the jackal-headed god, would lead the deceased to the scales. On one side, Anubis would place the heart, the ib, which the Egyptians understood as the seat of intelligence, memory, emotion, and moral character. On the other side, he would place the feather of Ma'at. The heart must balance perfectly with the feather, not lighter, which would indicate a life without substance or meaning, not heavier, which would indicate a heart weighed down with sin, with isfet, with violations of cosmic order. Perfect balance, perfect Ma'at. If the heart balanced, the deceased would be declared Ma Keru, true of voice, justified, and would pass into the field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise, where they would live eternally in a perfected version of Egypt itself, farming in fields that never failed, dwelling in peace under a sun that never scorched, sustained by offerings from the living world. But if the heart was heavy with sin, if it sank on the scales, a monster waited. Amit, the devourer, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, sat beside the scales, hungry and patient. She would devour the heart of the unjustified, and that soul would cease to exist, utterly destroyed, removed from existence itself. This was the second death, the true death, the death from which there was no resurrection. To avoid this fate, Egyptians spent their lives upholding Ma'at. What did this mean in practice? It meant speaking truth. It meant acting justly, not oppressing the widow or the orphan, not stealing, not killing unjustly, not taking what belonged to another. It meant fulfilling one's duties to family, to community, to the gods. It meant maintaining order in one's sphere of influence, whether that sphere was a household, a village, or the entire kingdom. The pharaoh bore the greatest responsibility for Ma'at. Through his rituals, his governance, his very existence as the living Horus, he maintained cosmic order, but every person participated in Ma'at according to their station. The farmer upheld Ma'at by working his fields properly, by paying his taxes honestly, by treating his family and neighbours justly. The scribe upheld Ma'at through honest record-keeping and fair administration. The soldier upheld Ma'at by protecting Egypt from the chaos of foreign invasion. To prepare for the judgment, Egyptians learned what came to be called the negative confession, 42 declarations of innocence to be recited before the 42 divine judges. I have not killed. I have not stolen. I have not caused pain. I have not made anyone weep. I have not polluted the water. I have not driven cattle from their pasture. Each declaration addressed a specific aspect of Ma'at, a specific way one might have introduced Isfet into the world. But the Egyptians were practical people. They knew human weakness. They knew that few could truthfully claim absolute innocence. So they developed insurance, magical texts. The Book of the Dead, which was not a single book, but a collection of spells, prayers, and instructions compiled over centuries, included spells specifically designed to protect the heart during judgment. Spell 30b addresses the heart directly. O my heart of my mother, do not stand up as a witness against me. Do not be opposed to me in the tribunal. Do not be hostile to me in the presence of the keeper of the balance. The spell essentially asked the heart not to testify against its owner, not to reveal sins that might tip the scales. Was this cheating? The Egyptians did not see it that way. The spells were themselves part of cosmic order, knowledge granted by the gods. Using them properly was itself an act of wisdom, of preparation, of understanding how the universe worked. This entire theological system reveals something profound about Egyptian civilization. They believed the universe operated on moral principles. The cosmos itself cared about justice. An unjust life had cosmic consequences, not merely social ones. The scales in the Hall of Two Truths were not arbitrary, not subject to divine whim or favour. They measured objective reality, the weight of your deeds, against the standard of universal truth. This belief shaped Egyptian law, Egyptian ethics, Egyptian society. It gave even the lowest peasant a stake in cosmic order. Your life mattered. Your choices mattered. The universe was watching, weighing, judging, and ultimate justice awaited everyone, pharaoh and farmer alike, in the Hall of Two Truths. You enter the Hall of Two Truths. You stand in darkness, and you are afraid. The journey through the underworld has been long and terrifying. You navigated lakes of fire. You spoke the correct passwords to demons guarding gates. You recited spells from the Book of the Dead that your family paid to have inscribed on your coffin and on papyrus rolls placed in your tomb. Those spells protected you, transformed you, gave you power to pass through dangers that would destroy an unprepared soul. But now you have arrived, and no spell can help you lie. You are in the Hall of Two Truths, and before you sits Osiris himself. The god's skin is green, the colour of resurrection, of vegetation returning after the inundation. He wears the white crown of Upper Egypt. He holds the crook and flail, symbols of kingship. His body is wrapped in the manner of a mummy, for Osiris is the first who died and the first who was resurrected. He is Lord of the underworld now, Judge of the dead, and his eyes are upon you. Beside Osiris stand the 42 divine judges, each representing a nome, a province of Egypt. They watch in silence. To your left, you see the creature called Amit. Her crocodile jaws hang open. Her lion's forelegs shift slightly, as though she is preparing to spring. Her hippopotamus hindquarters are massive and terrible. She is hungry. She is always hungry. And if the scales do not balance, you will feed her hunger. Anubis, the jackal-headed god who guided you through the underworld, now steps forward. In his hands, he carries your heart, removed from your body during mummification but preserved, waiting for this moment. Your heart, your ib, which contains everything you were, everything you thought, everything you did, every choice you made during your time in the living world. He places your heart on one side of a great scale. The scale itself seems to be made of gold and shadow, solid and insubstantial at the same time, existing in the realm where physical and spiritual realities merge. On the other side, Anubis places a single feather, the feather of Ma'at. It is white, perfect, unblemished. It weighs nothing and everything. It is the measure against which all hearts are judged. You want to close your eyes, but you cannot look away. The scale begins to move. You recite the negative confession, your voice shaking but clear. You address each judge in turn, declaring your innocence before them. I have not killed. I have not stolen. I have not told lies. I have not been angry without just cause. I have not fouled the water. I have not been arrogant. I have not cursed God. I have not caused anyone to weep. With each declaration, you remember moments from your life. Times you were kind. Times you were just. Times you upheld Ma'at in your small sphere. You were a merchant in life. Not wealthy, but honest. You gave accurate measures. You paid fair prices. You supported your family. You honored the gods with offerings within your means. You were not perfect, but you tried. You tried. The scale continues its slow movement. Your heart and the feather rise and fall, seeking equilibrium. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, stands ready with his palette and brush to record the judgment. His eyes are ancient and knowing. He has seen countless souls judged. He will see countless more. Amit shifts her weight. Her tongue lolls. She is patient. You remember your wife's face, your children's laughter, the smell of bread baking, the feeling of cool Nile water on a hot afternoon, the satisfaction of a fair deal concluded, the pleasure of placing offerings before the gods at festival time. Your life was not extraordinary, but it was yours, and you lived it as well as you knew how. The scale slows its movement, begins to settle. The feather and your heart hang suspended, trembling slightly, seeking their final positions. Your breath, though you no longer breathe in the way the living do, catches in your throat. The scale stops. Perfect balance. Anubis looks to Osiris. Thoth records the judgment in hieroglyphs that burn with their own light. The 42 judges incline their heads in acknowledgement. Osiris speaks, and his voice is the sound of the earth itself, deep and resonant and utterly certain. You are Makeru, true of voice, justified, pass into the field of reeds. Live forever, in the company of the blessed. The fear drains from you, replaced by a joy so intense it feels like light flooding through your ka. You are justified. You upheld Ma'at. Your heart was weighed and found worthy. Behind you, a door that was not there before opens onto fields of green grain, stretching to a perfect horizon under a perfect sky. You hear water flowing. You smell lotus flowers. The field of reeds awaits, and you may enter, and you will dwell there forever. Your name spoken by the living, your case sustained by their offerings, part of the eternal Egypt that exists beyond death. You step forward, leaving the hall of two truths behind, leaving judgment behind, entering into the eternity you prepared for throughout your mortal life. The scribe's path. Amenemhat is 12 years old, and his hands hurt from gripping the reed brush. He sits in the courtyard of the temple school, one of 40 boys ranging from age 8 to 16, all bent over their writing boards, all practicing the same hieroglyphic text they have been copying for days. The text is a teaching, one of the instructions, ancient wisdom passed down from earlier generations. Set your heart on being a scribe. Let your pen and palette be your joy. His palette is made of wood, a simple rectangle with 2 hollows carved at one end for cakes of red and black ink, and a slot for holding reed brushes. It is not fancy, but it is his, given to him when he entered the school 2 years ago. He has worn the wood smooth with handling. The ink cakes, made of soot and red ochre mixed with gum, need to be wetted on the palette before the brush picks them up. His hands are stained black. They are always stained black now, the mark of his profession. Shape the signs properly, Amenemhat. The instructor, an older scribe named Ptahhotep, walks among the students, examining their work. The reed leaf should curve thus, not stiffly. The owl should sit proudly, not slouch. These are divine signs. The god Thoth himself gave us writing. Honor his gift with excellence. Amenemhat bends closer to his work. He is copying a section about the superiority of the scribe's profession over all others. The scribe is freed from manual labor. He is spared the toil of the farmer who struggles with the inundation and the burning sun. He does not bear the burden of the soldier who marches into foreign lands and knows terror. He does not labor as the craftsman does, hunched over his work until his back fails. It is propaganda, of course, designed to motivate students to master the difficult art of hieroglyphic writing. But it is also true, as Amenemhat's father is a farmer. His hands are cracked and scarred from handling the plough. His back is bent from a lifetime of agricultural labor. He grows old before his time, worn down by the work that sustains Egypt. But Amenemhat's father recognized something in his son, a quickness of mind, a good memory, a certain cleverness with patterns. And so, though it cost the family dearly to spare him from farm work, they sent him to the temple school. If he succeeds, if he becomes a true scribe, a desh, he will rise above his origins. He will never be nobility, but he will be respected. He will work in the cool shade of administrative offices, not in the burning sun of the fields. He will eat better. He will live longer. He will serve Ma'at through honest record-keeping and fair administration. The price is this: endless practice. Hieroglyphic writing is complex. There are hundreds of signs to memorize. Some represent sounds, phonetic values. Others represent whole words or concepts. Some can function as either, depending on context. The same sign can mean different things in different positions. And beyond hieroglyphs, there is also hieratic script, the cursive form used for everyday documents. Faster to write, but requiring different muscle memory. Amenemhat must memorize not just the signs but model letters, standard forms for different types of documents. He must learn mathematics. The scribes calculate taxes and measure fields and manage granaries. He must learn something of law, of administration, of the proper forms of address for different ranks of officials. He must learn to write in the formal, elevated language of official documents, not the colloquial Egyptian he speaks at home. It is exhausting. Some days his head throbs from trying to remember everything. Some days his hand cramps so badly he can barely hold the brush. Some days he wants to run away, return to the village, accept a farmer's life as his ancestors did. But then he remembers, if he succeeds, he will never go hungry. He will never wonder if the inundation will come on time, if the harvest will be sufficient. He will serve the Pharaoh, the living God, and through that service, he will uphold Ma'at. His name will be written in records that last. He will matter in a way farmers rarely do. So he bends to his work again. He shapes the reed leaf more carefully. He makes the owl sit proudly. He copies the text about the blessed life of the scribe, who is freed from the burdens that crush common men. And when he is done, when his section is complete, and Ptahhotep nods approval, Amenemhat feels a flush of pride that makes the aching hands worthwhile. He is becoming a scribe. He is joining the ranks of those who control the written word, the sacred signs that Thoth gave to humanity. Through these signs, the past speaks to the present. Through these signs, the Pharaoh's decrees reach the furthest provinces. Through these signs, Ma'at is recorded and preserved. Amenemhat picks up his palette and his brush, and he begins the next section, knowing he is building his future, sign by careful sign, the black land and the red. To understand Egypt is to understand the fundamental distinction the Egyptians themselves made about their world. There was Kemet, the black land, the narrow strip of fertile soil deposited by the Nile's annual flood. And there was Deshret, the red land, the vast desert that stretched away on both sides of the river valley, hostile and empty and belonging to chaos. The Black Land was life. It was where crops grew, where villages stood, where temples rose, where the living dwelt, and the honored dead were remembered. The black soil was gift from the Nile, from Hapi, the god of the inundation, ultimately from the gods themselves. It was Ma'at, made visible, cosmic order manifest in dark, fertile earth that could sustain civilization. The Red Land was death, but also protection. The deserts east and west of the valley were barriers that insulated Egypt from foreign invasion for much of its history. Mountains rose in the eastern desert, source of valuable stone for building, wadis, dry riverbeds, cut through the landscape, occasionally carrying water after rare rains. The western desert, the Libyan desert, stretched seemingly without end toward the setting sun, toward the realm of the dead. Here the great necropolises were built, cities of the dead on the desert's edge, in the liminal space between the Black Land of the living and the Red Land of eternity. This geographic reality shaped Egyptian consciousness profoundly. Egypt was the center of the world, the place where order prevailed. Beyond Egypt's borders lay foreign lands, chaotic places where Ma'at did not fully reign, where inferior peoples lived in ways that violated cosmic order. The Egyptians were not wrong to see themselves as unique. Their civilization was unique, shaped by the Nile in ways that had no parallel elsewhere. The Nile itself flowed north from the highlands of Africa toward the Mediterranean, and this simple fact created a cognitive geography where south was up, the upstream direction, and north was down, the downstream direction. Upper Egypt, the narrow river valley stretching south from Memphis, was the upstream region. Lower Egypt, the broad delta, spreading out north of Memphis, was the downstream region. The winds blew predominantly from north to south, allowing boats to sail south against the current with their sails raised, then float north with the current when the sails were lowered. Travel in Egypt was almost absurdly easy compared to overland travel in other ancient civilizations. The Nile was everything. It was the highway connecting Upper and Lower Egypt. It was the source of water for irrigation. It was the bringer of fertile silt. It was the boundary between the land of the living and the land of the dead. The sun god Re sailed across the sky in his solar bark each day, then through the underworld each night in a different boat, and these celestial journeys mirrored the constant traffic of boats on the physical Nile. Egypt measured roughly 750 miles from the first cataract at Aswan, where rocks made navigation difficult and which marked Egypt's traditional southern border, to the Mediterranean coast. But the habitable zone, the Black Land, was rarely more than a few miles wide in Upper Egypt, sometimes narrowing to mere hundreds of yards, where the desert cliffs crowded close to the river. Only in the delta did the land open up, the river splitting into multiple branches and creating a broad fan of marshy, fertile territory. This geographic concentration meant Egyptian civilization was fundamentally different from riverine civilizations like Mesopotamia, where multiple cities competed for dominance across a broad plain. Egypt was a single valley with limited room for expansion, which encouraged political unity. Division was unnatural, a violation of the cosmic order. Unity was the proper state of things. The deserts provided valuable resources despite their hostility. Gold came from Nubian mines to the south. Copper and turquoise were mined in the Sinai. Semi-precious stones, carnelian and amethyst and jasper, were found in the eastern desert. The deserts were also the realm where the dead dwelt, where tombs could be cut into cliff faces or hidden in secret valleys, preserved by the absolute dryness that prevented decay. Water was everything. Where the Nile's gift reached, life flourished. Where it did not reach, nothing survived. This created a worldview where abundance and annihilation existed side by side, where prosperity was always dependent on the river's annual miracle, where the line between life and death was measured in yards, the distance from the black soil to the red sand. The Egyptians understood themselves as blessed by the gods with this perfect land, this narrow paradise protected by deserts from the chaos of foreign nations. They understood their duty to maintain Ma'at within this sacred space, to uphold the order that allowed the Nile to flood predictably, that kept the sun rising, that preserved Egypt as it should be, eternal, changeless, perfect. This understanding would be challenged repeatedly across the centuries to come. Egypt would not always remain isolated. Foreign influences would penetrate, invasions would occur, but always the fundamental truth remained. Egypt was the black land beside the river, civilization clinging to life's narrow thread through desert vastness, unique and precious, and fundamentally different from anywhere else on earth. The divine marriage? At the heart of Egyptian mythology, woven through every ritual and belief, every temple decoration and funerary text, was a story of murder, dismemberment, love, and resurrection. It was the story of Osiris and Isis, and their eternal struggle against Set, the god of chaos. This myth was not merely a tale, it was the theological foundation of pharaonic power, the template for understanding death and rebirth, the pattern that structured cosmos itself. In the beginning, according to the myth, the creator god Atum emerged from the primordial waters of Nun. Through acts of divine will or divine procreation, depending on which version you follow, Atum brought forth Shu, god of air, and Tefnut, goddess of moisture. They in turn produced Geb, the earth god, and Nut, the sky goddess. From this divine coupling came 4 children: Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. Osiris became the first king of Egypt, the divine pharaoh who taught humanity agriculture, law, and civilization itself. He ruled justly, establishing ma'at across the land. His sister wife Isis stood beside him, goddess of magic and wisdom, devoted beyond measure. Under Osiris's benevolent rule, Egypt knew a golden age of peace and prosperity. But Set, Osiris's brother, burned with jealousy. Set was the god of the desert, of storms, of chaos and foreign lands. Where Osiris represented order, Set represented disorder. Where Osiris was the fertile black land, Set was the sterile red land. The conflict between them was cosmic, inevitable, written into the very structure of reality. Set plotted murder. He crafted a magnificent chest, a coffin shaped precisely to Osiris's measurements. At a great feast, Set announced that this chest would be given as a gift to whomever it fit perfectly. Guest after guest tried to lie in the chest, but it fit none of them. Finally, Osiris, unsuspecting, lay down inside. The moment he did, Set and his conspirators slammed the lid shut, sealed it, and threw the chest into the Nile. Osiris drowned, trapped, unable to escape, but death was only the beginning of the story. Isis, grief-stricken and desperate, searched all of Egypt for her husband's body. She found the chest lodged in a tamarisk tree in Byblos, far to the north in the land of Lebanon. Through magic and determination, she retrieved Osiris's body and brought it back to Egypt. She hid it in the delta marshes, hoping to perform the proper burial rituals. Set discovered the body. Enraged that Osiris might be honoured even in death, Set committed an act of ultimate desecration. He cut Osiris's body into 14 pieces and scattered them across Egypt, ensuring that Osiris could never be made whole, never be properly buried, never achieve resurrection. Again, Isis searched. This time she was aided by her sister Nephthys, Set's wife, who was horrified by her husband's brutality. Together, the goddesses travelled the length of Egypt, finding the scattered pieces. They found all but one, the phallus, which had been eaten by fish in the Nile. Using her powerful magic, Isis fashioned a replacement from gold. With Osiris's body reassembled, Isis performed the first mummification. She wrapped the body in linen. She recited magical spells. She worked divine magic to resurrect her husband, if only temporarily. And in that brief window of renewed life, she conceived a child, Horus, the Avenger, who would grow up to challenge Set for the throne of Egypt. But Osiris, though resurrected by Isis's magic, could not remain in the living world. He had been too changed by death. Instead, he became the lord of the underworld, the king of the dead, the judge who would weigh hearts against Ma'at's feather. In death, Osiris found new purpose, new power. He became the god every Egyptian hoped to emulate, the one who died and yet lived, the template for resurrection. Horus grew to manhood in secret, hidden in the Delta marshes, protected by his mother's magic from Set's attempts to murder him. When he reached maturity, Horus challenged Set for the throne of Egypt. The two gods fought for 80 years. A cosmic struggle played out across the earth and sky. Horus lost an eye in the battle. Set lost his testicles. They fought with weapons and magic. In physical and spiritual realms, neither able to gain final victory. Eventually, the divine tribunal of the gods intervened. They declared Horus the rightful king of Egypt, the legitimate heir to Osiris's throne. Set was banished to the desert to reign over the chaotic Red Land, while Horus ruled the ordered Black Land. And from that moment forward, every pharaoh was Horus incarnate, the living god who had defeated chaos and maintained cosmic order. This myth permeated every aspect of Egyptian religion and politics. The pharaoh's accession to the throne reenacted Horus's victory. The pharaoh's death and burial reenacted Osiris's death and resurrection. Isis's magic became the model for all funerary spells designed to ensure resurrection. The annual flooding of the Nile was understood as Isis's tears for Osiris, or alternatively, as Osiris's divine essence flowing through the land, making it fertile again. Temples throughout Egypt performed daily rituals based on this mythology. Priests opened sanctuary doors each morning, awakening the god statue, reenacting the sun god's resurrection at dawn. They bathed the statue, clothed it, fed it, performing the care that Isis gave to Osiris. They closed the sanctuary each night, enacting the sun god's journey into the underworld, Osiris's realm. Major festivals celebrated key moments in the myth. The Koyak festival in late autumn reenacted Osiris's death and resurrection. Small figures of Osiris were crafted from Nile, mud, and grain seeds, then watered so the grain sprouted, demonstrating the god's resurrection in living plants. The grain was cut and the figures buried, then new ones made the following year, an endless cycle of death and rebirth mirroring the agricultural cycle itself. The myth explained why pharaohs had absolute power. They were Horus, the rightful king chosen by the gods. It explained why proper burial was essential, to follow Osiris's path to resurrection. It explained the conflict between order and chaos, the eternal struggle between Horus and Set. It gave Egyptians a framework for understanding death not as ending but as transformation, not as annihilation but as passage to new existence. Isis became one of Egypt's most beloved deities, the devoted wife, the powerful magician, the protective mother. Her cult would eventually spread beyond Egypt throughout the Mediterranean world, outlasting even the pharaohs themselves. Osiris became the god every Egyptian hoped to become in death, the justified one, the resurrected one, the eternal king. This was not abstract theology. This was the operating system of Egyptian civilization, the story that explained everything: kingship, death, resurrection, the Nile's flood, the struggle between order and chaos, the hope for eternal life. Every Egyptian knew this story. Every ritual referenced it. Every pharaoh embodied it. The divine marriage of Osiris and Isis, and the eternal conflict with Set, was Egypt's foundational truth. Fragments from the first collapse. Around 2180 BC, something went wrong. The Old Kingdom, which had seemed eternal, which had built the pyramids and established divine kingship, and created a civilization of unprecedented stability, began to fracture. The causes were multiple and interconnected. Climate change may have played a role. Evidence suggests reduced Nile floods during this period, leading to famine. The central authority had perhaps overextended itself. The massive pyramid projects draining resources that might have been better used building agricultural infrastructure. Provincial governors, nomarchs, had grown powerful during the 5th and 6th dynasties, commanding their own resources, building their own tombs, developing local power bases that rivaled the pharaohs. The reign of Pepi II, who supposedly ruled for 94 years from childhood to extreme old age, may have created a succession crisis. By the time Pepi II finally died, he had outlived several generations of potential heirs. The administrative structure had calcified around his extraordinarily long reign. When he was gone, chaos filled the vacuum. The 7th and 8th dynasties were weak, ephemeral, barely remembered. The unity that Narmer had established over 900 years earlier shattered. Egypt fragmented into competing power centers. Provincial governors declared independence. Local administrations struggled to maintain order as the central government collapsed. The period that followed, called the First Intermediate Period, was Egypt's first dark age. We have remarkable literary evidence of this time's trauma. A text called the Admonitions of Apua describes social chaos in vivid, disturbing terms. The land spins around as a potter's wheel does. Servants become masters. The poor have become rich. The rich wander as beggars. Children of nobles are dashed against walls. Noble ladies suffer like servant girls. Whether this text describes literal conditions or uses hyperbole to make theological points remains debated, but it captures the psychological shock of collapse. Egypt was supposed to be eternal. The pharaoh was supposed to maintain Ma'at. The Nile was supposed to flood reliably. When these certainties failed, when the cosmic order seemed to falter, Egyptians experienced profound disorientation. Other literature from this period strikes notes of pessimism and doubt, unprecedented in Egyptian texts. The dispute between a man and his Ba presents a dialogue where a man contemplates suicide, arguing with his own soul about whether life is worth continuing when social order has collapsed. To whom can I speak today? There is no righteous person. The land is left to those who do wrong. There is no loyal friend. The Song of the Harper questions whether elaborate tomb preparations are worthwhile when tombs are robbed and destroyed. Those who built tombs, their places are no more. What has become of them? None comes from there to tell of their state, to tell of their needs, to calm our hearts. Make holiday. Remember, no one takes his goods with him. No one who departs comes back again. This existential despair, this questioning of fundamental assumptions about Ma'at and resurrection and divine order, was revolutionary and shocking in Egyptian culture. These were not supposed to be questions with uncertain answers. The cosmic order was supposed to be reliable, eternal, guaranteed by the gods and maintained by the pharaoh, but the pharaoh had failed. Or perhaps the gods themselves had withdrawn their favor. Either way, Egypt was broken, and Egyptians struggled to understand how the impossible had happened. The First Intermediate Period lasted over a century, from roughly 2180 to 2050 BC. During this time, rival dynasties competed for legitimacy. The 9th and 10th dynasties ruled from Heracleopolis in Middle Egypt, and 11th dynasty emerged in Thebes in the south. They fought each other while trying to extend their control over surrounding territories. Art from this period shows decline in technical quality. The grand monuments of the Old Kingdom were not replicated. Provincial nomarchs built smaller tombs in local styles. The elaborate bureaucracy that had coordinated Egypt's economy fragmented into regional administrations. Yet Egyptian culture persisted even through collapse. Writing continued. Temples still functioned locally if not nationally. The fundamental concepts of Ma'at, of divine kingship, of resurrection through proper burial, remained in people's minds and hearts. Egypt was fractured but not destroyed, wounded but not dead. The memory of unity haunted the divided land. Everyone knew this was wrong, this fragmentation, this chaos. Egypt was supposed to be the two lands, united under a single pharaoh, a single divine king maintaining cosmic order. The First Intermediate Period was an aberration, a violation of the natural order, a problem that needed solving. Eventually, someone would solve it. Someone would reunify Egypt, would restore Ma'at, would rebuild the divine kingship, and re-establish the cosmic order. But that restoration lay decades in the future. First, Egyptians had to endure the darkness, had to maintain their culture and their hope through a time when all certainties seemed to have failed. The restoration, the man who finally reunified Egypt and ended the First Intermediate Period, bore the throne name Mentuhotep, meaning Montu is content, Montu being a war god of Thebes. He was the second king of that name in the 11th dynasty, but he would be remembered simply as the Uniter. the pharaoh who restored Ma'at after generations of chaos. Around 2050 BC, Mentuhotep II launched his campaign to bring the entirety of Egypt back under Theban control. His armies moved north from Thebes, conquering territory, defeating the rival 10th dynasty based at Heracleopolis. The final reunification occurred around 2040 BC, when Mentuhotep's forces gained control of the Delta and all of Lower Egypt, making him the undisputed lord of the two lands for the first time in over a century. Mentuhotep consciously modelled himself on the Old Kingdom pharaohs. He took the Horus name Sematawi, uniter of the two lands, echoing Narmer's ancient unification. He built a massive funerary complex at Deir el-Bahari, on the west bank of the Nile at Thebes, a terraced temple tomb rising against the dramatic cliffs, unprecedented in design, but clearly meant to evoke the grandeur of the Pyramid Age. The reunification brought more than political unity. It initiated what scholars call the Middle Kingdom, a cultural renaissance lasting roughly from 2050 to 1750 BC. This period would see a flowering of literature, art, and administrative sophistication that in some ways surpassed the Old Kingdom achievements. Thebes, Mentuhotep's home city, rose to prominence for the first time. Its local god, Amun, began the ascent that would eventually make him the supreme deity of the Egyptian pantheon, identified with Re as Amun-Re, king of gods. The temple complex at Karnak, which would eventually become the largest religious structure in the ancient world, began its long expansion during the Middle Kingdom, but it was the 12th dynasty, established by Amenemhat I around 1991 BC, that brought the Middle Kingdom to its zenith. Amenemhat was not of royal blood. He was a commoner, possibly the vizier of the last 11th dynasty pharaoh, who seized power through what may have been a coup. Knowing his legitimacy was questionable, he worked hard to establish his dynasty's credentials. Amenemhat moved the capital back north to a site called Ich-Tawi, near the junction of Upper and Lower Egypt, similar to Memphis's strategic location. He established a strong military, campaigning in Nubia to secure Egypt's southern border and control the gold mines. He reformed the administration, reigning in the power of provincial nomarchs, who had grown dangerously independent during the Old Kingdom and First Intermediate period. Most importantly, Amenemhat established a practice of co-regency, making his son, Senusret I, co-pharaoh, while Amenemhat still lived. This ensured smooth succession and prevented the succession crises that had contributed to the First Intermediate period's chaos. When Amenemhat died, possibly assassinated based on fragmentary evidence, in a text called The Instruction of Amenemhat, Senusret, I was already an experienced ruler, already recognized as pharaoh, and the transition involved no disruption of Ma'at. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs built pyramids again, though smaller than the Old Kingdom giants, constructed of mud brick, with stone casing rather than solid stone throughout. What the Middle Kingdom lacked in architectural monumentality, compared to the Old Kingdom, it compensated for in literary achievement. This was the golden age of Egyptian literature. The tale of Sinuhe, telling the story of an Egyptian official who fled to Syria-Palestine after Amenemhat I's death, then longed for Egypt, and finally received permission to return, became a classic that would be copied for centuries. The story of the shipwrecked sailor, combining adventure narrative with moral instruction, demonstrated sophisticated storytelling techniques. The Loyalist Instruction and other wisdom texts refined Egyptian moral philosophy. Middle Kingdom art showed new depth and psychological realism. Royal statues depicted pharaohs with lined faces, careworn expressions, signs of age and burden. These were not the idealized, eternally youthful faces of Old Kingdom sculpture. These were rulers who had known struggle, who had restored order from chaos, who bore the weight of maintaining Ma'at in a world they now knew could fail. The Middle Kingdom also saw increased contact with foreign lands. Egyptian trade expeditions travelled to Punt, probably located in modern Somalia or Eritrea, bringing back incense, myrrh, ebony, and exotic animals. Diplomatic relations developed with Syrian city-states. Nubia was conquered and fortified, a chain of massive mud brick fortresses built to control the Nile's second cataract, and protect Egypt's southern border. This period established patterns that would define Egypt through the New Kingdom and beyond. The concept of the pharaoh as shepherd of his people, responsible for their welfare, not merely their cosmic intermediary. The importance of literature and wisdom texts as vehicles for cultural values. The strategic necessity of controlling Nubia. The value of diplomatic and trade relationships with neighboring civilizations. The Middle Kingdom proved that Egypt could recover from catastrophic collapse, that Ma'at could be restored, that divine kingship could be re-established. This was psychologically crucial. The Old Kingdom had seemed eternal until it failed. The Middle Kingdom demonstrated resilience, the ability to resurrect order from chaos, to rebuild what had been lost. Egypt learned it could survive the impossible. That lesson would be tested again, far more severely, in the centuries ahead. The temple at dawn. The sanctuary doors remain closed, sealed since sunset, with a clay seal bearing the pharaoh's name. And inside, the god sleeps. Dawn approaches. The priests have been awake for hours, purifying themselves in the sacred lake, shaving their entire bodies to remove any impurity, rinsing their mouths with natron salt, dressing in clean white linen. They are preparing to wake the god, to perform the daily rituals that maintain cosmic order, that keep Ma'at functioning, that ensure the sun will rise, and the Nile will flood, and Egypt will endure. The high priest walks alone through the dim corridors toward the sanctuary. His feet are bare. He carries a small clay lamp that casts dancing shadows on the walls. The walls are covered with hieroglyphs and painted reliefs, showing the pharaoh making offerings to the gods, maintaining eternal rituals in eternal stone. The temple smells of incense, myrrh, and frankincense, the scent of divine presence. He reaches the sanctuary doors. He speaks the words of unsealing, words as old as Egypt itself. He breaks the clay seal. He pulls the bronze bolts. He opens the doors slowly, revealing the darkness within. Inside the sanctuary stands the statue of the god, perhaps Amun, perhaps Ptah, perhaps one of the hundreds of deities worshipped in Egypt's countless temples. The statue is carved from dark stone, or cast in bronze, or carved from precious wood, and covered in gold leaf. In the darkness, it is only a shape, waiting. The high priest lights lamps. Soft light fills the small chamber. The god's face emerges from shadow, painted eyes seeming to look at the priest with calm knowledge. Awake in peace, the priest chants. You awake in peace. The awakening of the god is in peace. He approaches the statue carefully, reverently. He removes the linen cloth that was draped over it at sunset. He touches the statue's mouth with sacred implements, the ritual called opening of the mouth, that gives the statue the power to eat, to speak, to be alive. The statue is not merely a representation of the god. Through these rituals, it becomes a dwelling place for the god's Ka, a point of contact between divine and mortal realms. The priest washes the statue with water from the sacred lake. He dries it with clean linen. He anoints it with precious oils, 7 different unguents, each with specific sacred properties. The scent of cedar oil fills the sanctuary. He dresses the statue in fresh linen, draping it carefully. He adorns it with jewelry, placing a necklace of gold and lapis lazuli around its neck. Then comes the offering: bread, beer, meat, vegetables, arranged on an altar before the statue. The god does not eat these offerings physically, of course, but the Ka consumes their spiritual essence, their vital energy. Later, after the Ka has taken what it needs, the physical food will be distributed to the priests, a system that sustains the temple economy while satisfying divine requirements. The high priest speaks prayers in the formal language of ritual, the elevated Egyptian that marks sacred speech from common conversation. He recites the god's names and titles. He praises the god's power. He asks for blessings on the pharaoh, on Egypt, on the cosmic order itself. Incense burns on a brazier, thin smoke rising toward the ceiling. The scent mingles with the oils, creating an atmosphere thick with holiness. This is the threshold between worlds, the moment when human and divine touch, when the mortal ritual worker contacts eternal divine power. Outside, the sun is rising. Ray's Barkay is emerging from the underworld, victorious over the forces of chaos that attack it each night. Inside the sanctuary, the god is awake, fed, honored, maintaining the relationship between heaven and earth that keeps creation functioning. The priest closes the sanctuary doors. He backs away slowly, sweeping away his footprints with a brush so he leaves no trace of mortal presence in the sacred space. He seals the doors again with clay, impressing the pharaoh's seal, locking the god safely inside until sunset, when different rituals will send the god to sleep again. Another day has begun in Egypt. The rituals are complete. Ma'at is maintained. The cosmic machinery turns smoothly because humans perform their sacred duties, because priests rise before dawn to wake the gods, because the pharaoh, through his representatives, upholds the eternal patterns established at creation. In the temple courtyard, other priests are beginning their duties. The sacred lake reflects the morning sky. Doves coo in the temple gardens. The day's heat has not yet arrived. There is a moment of perfect peace, of order maintained, of everything in its proper place according to divine plan. The temple stands, solid stone, reaching toward heaven, human architecture creating space for divine presence. Egypt's gift to the gods and the gods' gift to Egypt, both dwelling and relationship, both building and theology made solid, enduring as Ma'at endures, eternal as Egypt dreams itself eternal, the eloquent peasant. There is a Middle Kingdom text, a literary masterpiece that reveals Egyptian values with remarkable clarity, called The Tale of the Eloquent Peasant. It tells the story of a man named Khunanup, a simple farmer from the Wadi Natron region, who travels to Heracleopolis with a donkey train loaded with goods to trade: reeds, natron salt, sticks, skins, plants from his home region. On the journey, Khunanup passes through the estate of a minor official named Nemtinakt. This official, seeing the peasants' goods and wanting them for himself, devises a scheme. He spreads a large cloth across the narrow path between his land and a canal, blocking the way. When Khunanup approaches with his donkeys, Nemtinakt says, "Be careful, peasant, don't step on my cloth." Khunanup tries to guide his donkeys around the cloth, but the path is narrow. One donkey steps on the edge of Nemtinakt's barley field, eating a single mouthful of grain. Immediately, Nemtinakt seizes on this as an offence. "Your donkey is eating my barley. I shall confiscate this donkey as payment for the damage." This is naked injustice. The setup was deliberate. The claimed damage is trivial. The proposed penalty is wildly excessive. But Nemtinakt has power and position. Khunanup is merely a peasant. In many societies, the story would end here, with the powerful robbing the weak. But this is Egypt, and Egypt has Ma'at. Khunanup goes to Ramesses, the high steward, the chief administrator of the region, and makes his complaint. And here the tale becomes extraordinary, because Khunanup speaks with such eloquence, such rhetorical power, such profound understanding of justice and moral philosophy, that Ramesses is astounded. The peasant's first petition is a masterpiece. "O high steward, greatest of the great, leader of all that is not and all that is. When you go down to the sea of justice and sail upon it with true fairness of wind, may the ropes not come loose, may your ship not lag behind, may no accident befall your mast, may your yards not break." He appeals to Ma'at directly. Justice is for eternity. It descends with the doer of it into the grave. When he is buried and the earth enfolds him, his name is not erased from the earth. He is remembered because of goodness. That is the principle of the divine word. Ramesses, impressed but wanting to hear more of this remarkable speech, decides not to judge the case immediately. He sends Khunanup away without resolution. The peasant returns the next day with another petition, equally eloquent, then another, then another. In total, Khunanup makes 9 petitions, each developing the themes of justice, truth, and Ma'at with increasing sophistication and beauty. "Do justice for the sake of the Lord of Justice," the peasant pleads. "You who are the papyrus of the poor, the pilot of the weak. Do not let poverty carry off my case, nor greed twist it. A magistrate who is greedy is not impartial. A magistrate who is calm in the face of pleas is one who stands firm." Khunanup's eloquence transforms him from a simple peasant into a moral philosopher. a spokesman for Ma'at itself. His speech demonstrates that wisdom and understanding of cosmic order are not the exclusive possession of the elite. Even a farmer from a remote region can articulate truths that shame the powerful into right action. Finally, after the 9th petition, Renzi reveals that he has been having all of Khunanup's speeches written down to present to the pharaoh himself. The pharaoh, delighted by the peasant's eloquence, orders that justice be done. Nemtinak's property is confiscated and given to Khun-Anup. The peasant is rewarded richly for his speeches. Ma'at is upheld. The tale operates on multiple levels. It is entertainment, the story engaging with its recurring petitions, building rhetorical sophistication. It is moral instruction, teaching that eloquent speech and understanding of Ma'at are powerful tools, even for the powerless. It is political propaganda, showing that even the humblest Egyptian has access to justice if he can articulate his case properly. But most profoundly, it is a statement about Egyptian values. In the world of the eloquent peasant, truth matters more than power. Eloquence can overcome privilege. Ma'at is not merely abstract philosophy, but practical reality, accessible to anyone who understands it and can speak it convincingly. The pharaonic system, when functioning properly, protects even the weakest from injustice. Whether this reflected reality or aspiration is debatable. Certainly many peasants suffered injustice without redress, but that Egypt produced such a text, that scribes copied it for centuries, that it became a classic of Egyptian literature, tells us something important about how Egyptians wanted to see themselves and their civilization. Ma'at was not just for pharaohs and priests. It was universal law, cosmic order that applied to everyone. The eloquent peasant understood this truth and spoke it so beautifully that even the powerful had to listen, had to acknowledge, had to uphold justice, because that was the foundational principle of Egyptian existence. In a world often governed by naked force, Egypt at its best aspired to something higher. That aspiration, imperfectly realized but powerfully articulated, was part of what made Egyptian civilization distinctive, what gave it resilience through collapse and rebirth, what sustained it across 3,000 years. The Hyksos wound. Around 1650 BC, something happened that Egyptians would remember as a wound to their pride so deep it would fundamentally alter their civilization's trajectory. Foreign rulers seized control of Lower Egypt and established themselves as pharaohs. The Egyptians called them the Hyksos, rulers of foreign lands, and their conquest shattered the illusion of Egypt's invincibility. The Hyksos were not a unified people, but a collection of Semitic groups from the Levant, Syria, Palestine, who had been infiltrating the Delta region for decades, perhaps centuries. They came initially as merchants, as craftsmen, as settlers seeking better land. They established communities in the eastern Delta. They traded. They intermarried. They gradually increased their numbers and influence. Then, during a period when Egypt's central authority was weak, when the Middle Kingdom was fragmenting into what would become the Second Intermediate Period, the Hyksos seized their opportunity. They took control of Avaris in the eastern Delta and established it as their capital. They proclaimed themselves pharaohs of the 15th dynasty. They adopted Egyptian titles, Egyptian regalia, Egyptian administrative structures. They presented themselves as legitimate rulers maintaining Ma'at. But Egyptians did not accept this legitimacy. These were foreigners, outsiders, violators of cosmic order. They did not belong on the throne of Horus. Their presence as pharaohs was itself a form of Isfet, chaos incarnate. Later, Egyptian texts described the Hyksos conquest in apocalyptic terms. Manetho, an Egyptian priest who wrote a history of Egypt in the 3rd century BC, described the Hyksos invasion as a catastrophe. Unexpectedly, from the regions of the east, invaders of obscure race marched in confidence of victory against our land. By main force, they easily seized it without striking a blow, and having overpowered the rulers of the land, they then burned our cities ruthlessly, razed to the ground the temples of the gods, and treated all the natives with a cruel hostility. This account is probably exaggerated. The archaeological evidence suggests the Hyksos takeover was more gradual than sudden, more political than military in many phases. But the trauma was real. For the first time in over 1,000 years, foreigners ruled part of Egypt. The cosmic order that placed Egypt at the center of the world, protected by deserts from chaos, governed only by divine kings descended from Horus himself, had failed. The Hyksos brought new technology with them. They introduced the horse and chariot to Egypt, revolutionary military technology that would transform Egyptian warfare. They brought new bronzeworking techniques, new pottery styles, new trade connections with the Eastern Mediterranean. In purely practical terms, the Hyksos period connected Egypt more fully with the broader ancient Near Eastern world. But Egyptians could not see these innovations as gifts. They saw them as contaminations, foreign influences violating Egypt's purity. The Hyksos worshipped Seth, whom Egyptians associated with chaos and foreign lands. That the Hyksos would favor the god who murdered Osiris seemed to confirm their fundamental wrongness. During the Hyksos period, Egypt was divided. The Hyksos controlled the delta and parts of Middle Egypt. Native Egyptian dynasties, the 16th and 17th, ruled from Thebes in the south. For over a century, this divided state persisted, Egyptians chafing under foreign rule in the north, while maintaining traditional kingship in the south. The division was intolerable. It violated everything Egypt was supposed to be. The two lands were meant to be united under a single divine pharaoh. Division meant cosmic disorder. The Hyksos had to be expelled. Mart had to be restored. Egypt had to be made whole again under legitimate Egyptian rule. The project of expulsion would consume generations of Theban rulers. It would militarize Egyptian society in unprecedented ways. It would transform Egypt from an inward-looking civilization, content with its Nile Valley paradise, into an aggressive imperial power, determined never again to be vulnerable to foreign invasion. The Hyksos wound would not heal quickly or easily, but when it finally did heal, Egypt would emerge, transformed, stronger in some ways but also harder, more militaristic, more suspicious of foreigners, more determined to project power beyond its borders, rather than waiting for threats to arrive at the border. The age of the peaceful pyramid builders was over. The age of the warrior pharaohs was beginning. The warrior pharaohs, the expulsion of the Hyksos, began with a Theban pharaoh named Seqenenre-Tao II. His mummy, discovered in the 19th century AD, tells a brutal story. His skull shows multiple traumatic injuries. A blow from an axe that fractured his forehead. A blow from a blunt instrument that shattered his cheekbone. A dagger thrust behind his ear. These wounds show no sign of healing, suggesting Seqenenre died in battle or was executed immediately after capture. He died fighting the Hyksos, and his death became a rallying point. His son, Thutmose, continued the struggle. Thutmose's war stele, inscribed stone monuments recording his campaigns, show a pharaoh consumed with the mission of expelling the foreigners. "I should like to know what serves this strength of mine," he proclaimed, "when a chief in Avaris and another in Kush have arisen, and I sit associated with an Asiatic and a Nubian, each man in possession of his slice of Egypt." The division was intolerable. Thutmose launched campaigns north, attacking Hyksos positions, reclaiming Egyptian territory. He died before completing the work, possibly also in battle, but he had weakened the Hyksos significantly, setting the stage for final victory. That victory came under Thutmose I, who ascended the throne around 1550 BC while still a child. When he reached maturity, Thutmose led Egyptian armies north in a final campaign against the Hyksos. He besieged Avaris, the Hyksos capital. The siege lasted years, a grinding war of attrition. Finally, around 1522 BC, Avaris fell. The Hyksos were expelled from Egypt, pursued into southern Palestine, where Thutmose destroyed their remaining strongholds. Egypt was reunified. Ma'at was restored. The trauma was ended. Thutmose established the 18th dynasty and initiated what scholars call the New Kingdom, the period of Egypt's greatest power, when the Nile Valley Kingdom would become a true empire, dominating the Eastern Mediterranean world. But the Hyksos experience had changed Egypt fundamentally. Egyptian pharaohs concluded that defense was not enough. Egypt's borders had to be pushed outward. Buffer zones had to be established. Foreign peoples had to be subjugated to prevent future invasions. The military had to be a permanent, professional force, not merely farmers called up during emergencies. Thutmose's successors built on his foundation. Amenhotep I campaigned in Nubia, securing Egypt's southern flank, but it was Thutmose I who truly established the Egyptian empire. He campaigned northeast into Syria, reaching as far as the Euphrates River, where he erected a victory stela, proclaiming Egyptian dominance. He campaigned south deep into Nubia, extending Egypt's control far beyond the traditional First Cataract border. Then came Hatshepsut, one of the most remarkable figures in Egyptian history. She was regent for her young stepson Thutmose III, but instead of relinquishing power when he came of age, she proclaimed herself pharaoh. She ruled for over 20 years, presenting herself in royal regalia, including the false beard traditionally worn by kings, depicted in temple reliefs, performing all the masculine duties of kingship. Hatshepsut's reign was generally peaceful and prosperous. She sponsored a famous trading expedition to Punt, bringing back exotic goods, depicted in beautiful reliefs, at her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. She oversaw major building projects, including the addition of the famous obelisks at Karnak Temple. She maintained the empire her predecessors had won, without the aggressive campaigns that would characterize later reigns. But when Hatshepsut died around 1458 BC, Thutmose III finally assumed sole power, and he would prove to be Egypt's greatest military pharaoh, the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. Over 17 campaigns, spanning 33 years, Thutmose III expanded and consolidated Egyptian control over an empire stretching from the fourth cataract of the Nile, in Nubia, to northern Syria. His first campaign, the Battle of Megiddo, around 1457 BC, set the pattern. A coalition of Canaanite and Syrian city-states had rebelled against Egyptian overlordship, gathering their forces at the fortress city of Megiddo. Thutmose marched his army north and faced a strategic choice: take a long, safe route around the mountains or risk a direct assault through the narrow Aruna Pass. Against his general's advice, Thutmose chose the dangerous direct route. His army emerged from the pass to find the enemy forces dispersed, expecting the Egyptians to take the safer routes. Thutmose attacked immediately. The battle was decisive. The coalition forces fled into Megiddo. Thutmose besieged the city for 7 months until it surrendered. The victory at Megiddo broke the rebellion and established Egyptian dominance. But Thutmose understood that military conquest was not enough. He had to create administrative structures to maintain control. He appointed Egyptian governors in key cities. He took the sons of conquered rulers back to Egypt as hostages and educated them in Egyptian ways, creating a generation of foreign leaders loyal to Egypt. He established a tribute system that funneled wealth from the empire into Egypt's treasury. Campaign followed campaign. Thutmose crossed the Euphrates and defeated Mitanni, Egypt's primary rival for control of Syria. He secured the Levantine coast, ensuring Egyptian control of crucial trade routes. He fortified Egypt's position in Nubia, building temples that proclaimed Egyptian power and Egyptian gods to subjected peoples. The tribute from this empire was staggering: gold from Nubian mines, timber from Lebanon, copper from Cyprus, silver, horses, exotic animals, precious stones, grain, wine, oil, all flowing into Egypt, enriching the temples, funding building projects, filling the pharaoh's treasuries. Egypt had never been wealthier or more powerful, but empire had costs. It required constant military readiness. It required garrisons in distant lands. It required diplomatic efforts to maintain alliances and manage rivalries with other great powers like Mitanni, the Hittites, and later Assyria. It exposed Egypt to foreign influences, foreign ideas, foreign religions that would gradually erode the cultural isolation that had defined earlier Egyptian civilization. The warrior pharaohs had secured Egypt against future Hyksos-style invasions. They had made Egypt the dominant power of the Eastern Mediterranean, but they had also fundamentally transformed Egyptian society from an inward-looking Nile Valley civilization into an outward-facing empire engaged with and deep influenced by the broader ancient world. Egypt would never return to the isolation of the Pyramid Age. The Hyksos wound, in being healed, had changed the patient permanently. You march with Pharaoh's army, orchestrated immersive second-person narrative depicting ancient military service. This is the third second-person immersion passage. I need to maintain the present tense, sensory details, and immersive quality while depicting service in Thutmose III's imperial army. Should be minimum 650 words. The target for this section is 650 words. You are a soldier in Pharaoh's army, and you have been marching for 6 days through the desert toward the fortress of Megiddo. Your name is Amenhotep, and you are a standard infantryman, a foot soldier carrying a spear, a shield of wood and leather, and a bronze khopesh sword at your belt. You wear a simple kilt and a padded linen cap that provides minimal protection but keeps the sun from your head. Your feet, wrapped in leather sandals, are blistered and aching. The desert sand has found its way into every crevice of your body, despite your best efforts. Around you march thousands of other men. The army of Thutmose III is massive, perhaps 10,000 strong, the largest force Egypt has ever assembled. Infantry divisions march in organized columns. Chariot squadrons travel alongside, their horses raising dust that hangs in the still air. Supply wagons creak and groan, pulled by oxen, carrying food, water, weapons, tents, everything an army needs to survive far from home. You can see the Pharaoh's standard ahead, the golden falcon of Horus glinting in the sunlight. Thutmose III himself rides in his chariot, though from your position, near the rear of the column, he is just a distant figure surrounded by his guard. But his presence fills you with confidence. He is not merely your commander. He is Horus incarnate, the living god, and marching under his banner, you are participating in the maintenance of Ma'at itself. The enemy, a coalition of Canaanite city-states, led by the Prince of Kadesh, has violated cosmic order by rebelling against Egyptian dominion. They have rejected the tribute they owe. They have insulted the Pharaoh's divine authority. They have chosen Isfet over Ma'at, chaos over order. Your role, along with every other soldier in this massive army, is to correct this violation, to restore proper order through force of arms. 2 days ago, you reached the Aruna Pass, the narrow route through the mountains that leads directly to Megiddo. The generals argued for taking the safer, northern or southern routes. You could hear the debate from where your unit was camped. The generals said the pass was too dangerous, too narrow, that the enemy could slaughter the army as it emerged in small groups. But Thutmose overruled them. He would lead the army through the Aruna Pass himself. If the pharaoh was willing to take the risk, how could his soldiers refuse? You marched through the pass, single file, in places where the walls rose steep and close on both sides. Your heart pounded with fear that ambush would come at any moment. But the pass was empty. The pharaoh's gamble had worked. The enemy expected you to take the safe routes and had positioned their forces accordingly. Now, emerging from the pass, you see the plain of Megiddo spread before you. In the distance, the fortress city rises on its hill, and between you and the city, you see the enemy army, scattered and unprepared, scrambling to form battle lines. The order comes down through the ranks. Form for battle. Your unit moves into position, shields locked, spears ready. The chariot divisions wheel to the flanks. Archers move forward to provide covering fire. The entire army, which moments ago was a marching column, stretched across miles of terrain, transforms into a fighting formation with the discipline and speed that comes from years of training and the coordination of a professional military. You grip your spear tighter. Your mouth is dry despite the water you drank this morning. Your heart hammers against your ribs. You have trained for this. You have drilled the formations until they are second nature. But this is your first real battle. You have never killed a man. You have never felt a blade cut your flesh. The training is about to be tested. Around you, your companions in the ranks show similar tension. Some mutter prayers to Amun or Montu, war gods who protect soldiers. Some joke nervously, trying to dispel fear with laughter. Some are silent, faces set, focused inward. The trumpets sound. The pharaoh's chariot moves forward. The entire army surges forward with him, and you are running, shouting, the dust rising in clouds, the enemy rushing to meet you. The lines collide with a sound like thunder. Metal on wood, men shouting, screaming, dying. Your spear finds a target, the impact jarring your arms. You pull it free, thrust again. Someone swings at you with an axe. You catch the blow on your shield, feel the wood splinter. You slash with your khopesh, feel it bite into flesh. Time becomes strange. Moments stretch and compress. The battle is chaos and clarity, terror and exhilaration, the ultimate test of your courage and your training and your devotion to the Pharaoh, who is more than a man, who is God incarnate, leading you to restore cosmic order through the ancient method of war. You fight for Egypt. You fight for Ma'at. You fight because you are a soldier in the greatest army the world has ever seen. And before you, the enemy breaks and runs toward the safety of Megiddo's walls. Victory tastes like dust and blood, and the knowledge that you survived, that you served the Pharaoh well, that you are part of something larger than yourself, the heretic's son. Around 1353 BC, a pharaoh ascended the throne who would attempt something unprecedented and ultimately catastrophic, a religious revolution that threatened to overturn 3,000 years of tradition and belief. His birth name was Amenhotep, the fourth pharaoh of that name, son of Amenhotep III and Queen Tiye, but he would abandon that name, which meant Amun is satisfied, in favour of a new name that would define his revolution, Akhenaten, effective for the Aten. The Aten was the sun disk, the physical manifestation of the sun god Re. In traditional Egyptian religion, the Aten was one aspect of solar worship, among many. Re, Horakti, Amun-Re, all represented different facets of solar divinity. But to Akhenaten, the Aten was not merely one manifestation of the divine. The Aten was the sole god, the only god, the universal creator deserving exclusive worship. Akhenaten proclaimed a form of monotheism, though whether it was true monotheism or extreme henotheism, the worship of one god, while acknowledging others exist, remains debated. What is clear is that Akhenaten actively suppressed worship of the traditional gods, particularly Amun, the supreme deity of the New Kingdom pantheon. He went further than proclamation. He closed temples. He defaced inscriptions bearing Amun's name, sending workers throughout Egypt to chisel the god's name from monuments. He dismissed the powerful priests of Amun, who controlled vast wealth and land holdings. He attempted to erase centuries of religious tradition and replace it with exclusive devotion to the Aten. To symbolize his break with tradition, Akhenaten abandoned Thebes, the traditional capital, where Amun's great temple at Karnak dominated the religious landscape. He built an entirely new capital city on virgin ground in Middle Egypt, a site with no previous religious associations. He called it Akhetaten, Horizon of the Aten, modern Tel El Amarna. Here, he constructed temples without roofs, open to the sun, where the Aten's rays could shine directly on worshippers. The art of Akhenaten's reign is distinctive, revolutionary, strange. Traditional Egyptian art depicted pharaohs as idealized, eternally youthful, perfect embodiments of divine kingship. But Amarna art showed Akhenaten with elongated skull, narrow shoulders, prominent belly, wide hips, features that appear almost feminine or alien. His wife, Nefertiti, his daughters, even his courtiers, were depicted in this same distinctive style. Whether these representations showed actual physical characteristics, possibly from a genetic condition, or were symbolic expressions of Akhenaten's unique relationship with the Aten, scholars debate. Nefertiti, whose name means "the beautiful one has come," appears prominently in Amarna art, sometimes shown performing rituals traditionally reserved for pharaohs, smiting enemies, making offerings to the Aten. She may have served as co-regent, sharing royal power with Akhenaten in unprecedented ways. Her famous bust, discovered at Amarna and now in a Berlin museum, shows a woman of striking beauty and regal bearing. But beneath the artistic revolution and the religious proclamations, Akhenaten's reign was creating serious problems. The suppression of traditional religion alienated powerful constituencies. The priests of Ammon lost their positions and livelihoods. Common Egyptians who worshipped Osiris for hope of resurrection, who prayed to Hathor for love, who sought protection from Bes against evil, found their gods denied, their temples closed, their traditional practices condemned. The Amarna letters, diplomatic correspondence discovered at Akhetaten, written in Akkadian cuneiform, reveal another crisis. Egyptian vassals in Syria-Palestine sent increasingly desperate pleas for military support against enemies. The Hittites were expanding. Local rebellions were breaking out. Egyptian dominance over the Levant, so carefully constructed by Thutmose III and maintained by his successors, was fraying. But Akhenaten seems to have been uninterested in military affairs, consumed instead with his religious revolution. He did not campaign to maintain the empire. He did not respond adequately to his vassals' pleas. Egyptian prestige and power in the region declined dramatically during his 17-year reign. The religious texts from Akhenaten's reign, particularly the great hymn to the Aten, show sophisticated theological thinking. The Aten is presented as universal creator, provider for all peoples, not merely Egypt. The hymn describes the Aten's daily cycle, bringing life with dawn's light, accepting the world's darkness at dusk, caring for all creatures, from humans to animals to plants. It is beautiful, profound theology, but it was also theology that violated Ma'at, as Egyptians understood it. The traditional gods were not optional extras. They were fundamental to cosmic order. Osiris guaranteed resurrection. Isis provided magical protection. Ptah was the creative craftsman. Thoth maintained written knowledge. Each god had essential functions. To eliminate them was to threaten the machinery of cosmos itself. Akhenaten's revolution failed, ultimately, because it violated too much too quickly. It threatened too many powerful interests. It removed religious certainties that Egyptians had relied on for millennia. And when Akhenaten died around 1336 BC, his revolution died with him. His young son, originally named Tutankhaten, living image of the Aten, ascended the throne. Within a few years, the boy pharaoh changed his name to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun, moved the capital back to Thebes, reopened the traditional temples, and restored the worship of the old gods. Akhenaten's Aten cult, his monotheistic experiment, his entire religious revolution, was systematically erased from history. Later, pharaohs would refer to Akhenaten, if they mentioned him at all, as the criminal or the rebel. His city, Akhetaten, was abandoned, left to crumble in the desert. His name was omitted from official king lists. Everything he built, everything he proclaimed, was deliberately forgotten. Egypt had flirted with radical change and rejected it absolutely. The old gods returned, Ma'at was restored, and Egyptian civilization would continue for over a millennium more. Conservative, traditional, resistant to change, having learned through Akhenaten's failure that some innovations were too dangerous, some breaks with the past too destructive to permit, the restoration of the gods. The boy who became Tutankhamun was probably only 8 or 9 years old when he ascended the throne around 1332 BC. His parentage is uncertain, possibly son of Akhenaten himself, or of Akhenaten's brother. What is certain is that he inherited a kingdom in crisis, its traditional religion suppressed, its empire weakening, its people confused and alienated. The young pharaoh could not possibly have governed alone. He was guided by advisors, particularly a general named Horemheb and the high official A. These men understood that Akhenaten's revolution had failed, that restoration was necessary if Egypt was to survive and thrive again. Within 3 years of Tutankhamun's coronation, the reversal began. A stela erected at Karnak Temple, called the Restoration Stela, describes the situation Tutankhamun inherited and the measures he took to correct it. The temples from one end of Egypt to the other had fallen into neglect, the text declares. Their shrines had fallen into desolation and become overgrown with weeds. Their sanctuaries were as if they had never been. Their halls served as roads. The land was in distress. The gods had turned their backs on this land. The stela describes Tutankhamun's response. rebuilding the temples, restoring the priesthoods, replenishing the offerings, bringing back the traditional festivals. The name was changed from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun, symbolically moving from the Aten's living image to Amun's. The capital moved from Akhenaten back to Thebes, Amun's sacred city. The priests of Amun, dispossessed and humiliated during Akhenaten's reign, were restored to power and privilege. Tutankhamun commissioned new cult statues, replacing those destroyed or defaced during the Aten Revolution. He provided generous endowments to the temples from the royal treasury. He participated in traditional festivals, performing the rituals that Akhenaten had rejected, demonstrating that the pharaoh was once again upholding Ma'at in the time-honored ways. The young pharaoh's reign was short, only about 9 years. He died around 1323 BC, at approximately 18 years old, possibly from complications from a broken leg that became infected, possibly from other causes. His death received little notice at the time. He had restored tradition, but he had not reigned long enough or accomplished enough to be remembered as a great pharaoh. His tomb in the Valley of the Kings, designated KV 62, was small and hastily prepared, suggesting his death was unexpected. It was robbed twice in antiquity, but then sealed and forgotten, buried under debris from the excavation of later tombs. When Howard Carter discovered it intact in 1922 AD, it became the most famous archaeological find in history, its treasures revealing the wealth and artistry of New Kingdom Egypt. But Tutankhamun's importance to his own time was modest. He was a transitional figure, a boy king, guided by powerful advisors who used his reign to reverse Akhenaten's revolution. After Tutankhamun's death, the advisor A briefly ruled. Then the general Horemheb seized power. Horemheb was not of royal blood, but he had military might and administrative competence. He systematically completed the work of erasing Akhenaten's memory. He issued decrees restoring order to the bureaucracy. He conducted campaigns to reassert Egyptian power in the Levant. He demolished buildings at Akhenaten and used the stone blocks as fill for his own construction projects, literally burying Akhenaten's legacy. Most significantly, Horemheb declared that the legitimate succession passed directly from Amenhotep III to himself, skipping Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and A entirely. In official records, these reigns were deleted from history. The 18th dynasty's end was pushed backward, and Horemheb presented himself as restorer of Ma'at after a period of chaos that official history would not acknowledge. This was more than political maneuvering, it was theological necessity. Akhenaten's reign had violated Ma'at so profoundly that acknowledging it as legitimate pharaonic rule was impossible. Better to pretend it never happened, to erase it completely, to restore the narrative of unchanging divine order, maintained by an unbroken succession of legitimate pharaohs. The restoration was complete, perhaps too complete. Egypt had survived a crisis of identity and rejected change absolutely. The conservative, tradition-bound nature of Egyptian civilization, always strong, became even more entrenched. Innovation was suspect. Foreign influences were dangerous. The old ways were the only ways, unchangeable because they reflected eternal cosmic order. This conservatism would prove both strength and weakness in the centuries ahead. It would preserve Egyptian civilization's distinctive character far longer than any other ancient culture. But it would also make adaptation difficult when changing circumstances demanded flexibility. Egypt would endure, but increasingly as a relic, a living fossil, magnificent but unable to evolve. For now, though, Ma'at was restored. The gods were back in their temples. The priests chanted the traditional hymns. The pharaoh performed the ancient rituals. Egypt was Egypt again, as it had been, as it should be, as it would always be, forever and eternal, or so the Egyptians hoped. The Battle of Kadesh. In the 5th year of his reign, around 1274 BC, Ramesses II marched north at the head of the largest army Egypt had assembled since Thutmose III, 20,000 men divided into 4 divisions named for the gods Amun, Re, Ptah, and Seth. His target was Kadesh, a fortress city on the Orontes River in what is now Syria, controlled by the Hittite Empire, Egypt's primary rival for dominance in the Levant. Ramesses was young, probably in his mid-20s, eager to prove himself as warrior pharaoh in the tradition of the great conquerors. He had prepared meticulously. His divisions were well equipped, his chariots numerous, his confidence absolute. He intended to crush the Hittites, to expand Egyptian control deep into Syria, to eclipse the military achievements of all previous pharaohs. But Muwatalli II, the Hittite king, was no inexperienced opponent. He had assembled his own massive force, perhaps even larger than the Egyptian army, drawing contingents from throughout the Hittite realm and from allied kingdoms. And he had set a trap. Ramesses and the Amun division, leading the Egyptian advance, approached Kadesh from the south. Two Bedouin nomads appeared, claiming to be deserters from the Hittite army, and told Ramesses exactly what he wanted to hear. The Hittites were far away, at Aleppo, too frightened to face Egyptian might. Kadesh lay undefended, ready for easy conquest. Ramesses believed them. He pushed forward rapidly with the Amun division, eager to seize the undefended city. Behind him, the Re division followed at some distance. The Ptah and Seth divisions trailed even farther back. The Egyptian army was strung out across miles of terrain, its divisions separated, vulnerable. The truth, which Ramesses discovered too late, was that the entire Hittite army lay hidden just beyond Kadesh. The Bedouin deserters were Hittite agents. Muwatalli had positioned his forces perfectly for ambush, and when Ramesses camped northwest of Kadesh, setting up his headquarters and waiting for his divisions to arrive, the Hittites struck. 2,500 Hittite chariots, far more than the Egyptians fielded, smashed into the Re division as it approached Ramesses's camp. The division shattered, its soldiers fleeing in panic. The Hittite chariots pursued them directly into Ramesses's camp, creating chaos. Ramesses found himself surrounded, his camp overrun, his army dispersed, facing certain defeat. Everything he had planned had collapsed. He was moments from death or capture, either outcome a catastrophe for Egypt. What happened next depends on which account you believe. According to Egyptian records, particularly the poetic account called the Poem of Pentor, and the pictorial reliefs Ramesses had carved on temple walls throughout Egypt, the pharaoh performed miracles. Ramesses, abandoned by his panicking soldiers, called out to Amun, "I call to you, my father Amun. Have you forgotten your son? Have I done anything without you? Do I not walk and halt at your word?" And Amun answered, giving Ramesses supernatural strength. The pharaoh mounted his chariot and charged into the enemy. Alone, unstoppable, he slew hundreds of Hittites single-handedly. His arrows never missed. His horses were faster than the wind. The enemy fled before him in terror. The reality was almost certainly different. The Ptah division's arrival from the south probably saved Ramesses, attacking the Hittites from behind and allowing the Egyptians to regroup. The Nearin, an elite force that may have approached from the coast, possibly contributed to turning the tide. The battle became a desperate melee, with neither side achieving decisive victory. By the next day, both armies were bloodied and exhausted. Neither king wanted to continue fighting. They agreed to withdraw. The Hittites retained control of Kadesh. The Egyptians retreated south. Militarily, it was a draw at best, a defeat at worst for Egypt, but Ramesses presented it as the greatest victory in Egyptian history. He commissioned extensive accounts carved on temple walls at Karnak, at Luxor, at Abu Simbel, at Abydos, at the Ramesseum, his mortuary temple. The Poem of Pentor and the Bulletin text, two different literary accounts, circulated widely. Ramesses had saved Egypt through personal valor and divine favor. He was the greatest warrior who ever lived. He had defeated the Hittites through his own superhuman prowess. This was propaganda on a scale rarely seen in ancient history. Ramesses needed to spin disaster as triumph. His legitimacy depended on military success. He could not admit that he had been ambushed, that he had nearly lost, that he had been forced to withdraw without achieving his objectives. The interesting thing is, it worked. For over 3,000 years, Ramesses' version was the only version known. Not until the 20th century AD did scholars discover Hittite records of the battle, which present a very different picture. The Hittites claimed victory. Control of Kadesh retained. The Egyptians driven back. The truth probably lies somewhere between the accounts. Neither side won decisively. Both suffered heavy casualties. Both withdrew without achieving their larger strategic objectives. It was the kind of battle that leads to stalemate, to mutual exhaustion, to eventual peace treaties, rather than decisive victory for either side. Indeed, 16 years later, Ramesses and the next Hittite king signed one of history's first recorded peace treaties, establishing formal relations between the two powers, agreeing on borders, pledging mutual defense against common enemies. Ramesses even married a Hittite princess, cementing the alliance. But Kadesh remained Ramesses' defining moment, not as the near disaster it actually was, but as the glorious triumph he presented it to be. The battle reveals something important about pharaonic power. It rested not just on military might, but on narrative control, on the ability to shape how events were remembered. Ramesses understood this profoundly. He may not have won at Kadesh, but he won the battle of memory, and in the end, that mattered more. The tomb's darkness, deep beneath the desert, deep beneath the Valley of the Kings where the cliffs glow red in sunlight. But here know only eternal darkness. The tomb waits. The air is perfectly still. No breath of wind has stirred here for 3,000 years. The temperature is constant, cool. Neither the desert's burning heat, nor the night's relative chill penetrating to these sealed chambers. Time itself seems suspended in the absolute darkness. Against the walls, painted scenes glow in the torchlight when anyone dares enter. The Pharaoh's journey through the underworld, carefully depicted, every stage of the dangerous passage mapped in pigment and hieroglyphs. The sun god's barker sailing through the hours of night, the demons that must be passed, the gates that must be opened, the spells from the Book of the Dead that will protect and transform the deceased. The colours are as vivid as the day they were painted. Red ochre, yellow ochre, black carbon, white gypsum, blue and green from copper compounds. The dry desert air has preserved them perfectly, though any human breath that enters carries moisture that will gradually, imperceptibly, work degradation. In the burial chamber, the sarcophagus rests, granite carved and polished to mirror smoothness. The lid weighs tons but seems to float, so precisely is it balanced. Inside, nested coffins of decreasing size, gold and wood and semi-precious stone. And innermost, the mummy, the Ket preserved, wrapped in linen, amulets placed between the layers, according to precise ritual prescription. The face is covered with a mask of gold, idealized features, showing the pharaoh eternally young, eternally perfect. The eyes are inlaid with obsidian and quartz, seeming to stare into the darkness with calm knowledge. The false beard of kingship is lapis lazuli. The vulture and cobra of the uraeus rise from the forehead, protecting, warning, declaring divine kingship, even in death. The car waits here. The bar travels forth by day, visiting the land of the living, sustained by offerings left in the mortuary temple. But the car remains with the body, needing the physical form preserved, needing the tomb intact, needing the protective spells maintained. Guardian statues flank the chamber, life-sized figures of the pharaoh, holding staff and flail, watchful, eternal. They too have eyes of inlaid stone that catch torchlight and seem almost alive. They will stand guard here until the world ends, until the cosmos dissolves back into the primordial waters of none from which creation first emerged. The walls whisper with hieroglyphs, every surface covered with sacred text, pyramid texts, coffin texts, Amduat, Book of Gates, Book of the Dead. Every spell the pharaoh needs to navigate the underworld, to be justified before Osiris, to achieve resurrection as Ak, transfigured spirit. The darkness feels thick, substantial, as though darkness itself is a presence, a force that fills the space when light withdraws. It is not threatening darkness, but patient darkness, protective darkness, the darkness of the womb where resurrection gestates. Somewhere above, the sun crosses the sky, dawn comes, noon blazes, dusk fades, night falls, the cycle continues. Eternal, indifferent to the tomb deep below where the pharaoh rests, where his name endures on walls and in the memory of the gods, where his car waits for the offerings that will sustain it through eternity. The silence is perfect, complete, absolute. This is the silence that existed before creation, that will exist after creation ends. The silence of the void that contains all possibility. It is broken only when archaeologists or thieves violate the sacred space, bringing light and air and disturbance to chambers meant to remain sealed forever. But the tomb endures. The spells endure. The painted gods on the walls endure. The pharaoh's name endures. And that endurance, that preservation across millennia, is itself a kind of victory over death, an achievement of the immortality that Egyptian civilization pursued with such magnificent, determined, ultimately successful obsession. The tide from the sea. Around 1177 BC, in the 8th year of Ramesses III's reign, something appeared on the Mediterranean horizon that would signal the beginning of Egypt's long, slow decline from imperial power. They came by ship and by land, a coalition of peoples from the collapsing civilizations of the Aegean and Anatolia, displaced by calamities. Scholars still struggle to fully understand. The Egyptians called them simply the Sea Peoples, and their arrival coincided with the end of the Bronze Age world. The great civilizations that had dominated the eastern Mediterranean for centuries were falling. The Hittite Empire collapsed entirely, its capital Hattusa burned and abandoned. Mycenaean Greece, fragmented into dark ages, city after city along the Levantine coast, fell to raiders and invaders. Ugarit, the prosperous trading centre, sent a desperate final letter pleading for help before disappearing from history. The entire network of palace economies, diplomatic relationships, and trade routes that had connected the Bronze Age world was coming apart. The Sea Peoples were not a unified nation, but a confederation of groups moving southward and eastward, fleeing collapse in their homelands, seeking new lands to settle. Egyptian texts name several groups among them: the Peliset, who may have become the Philistines of later biblical accounts, the Tsheka, the Shekelesh, the Denyen, the Weshesh. They came with their families, their possessions loaded into ox carts, their warriors armed and desperate. They had already swept through the Hittite territories. They had devastated Cyprus. They had struck the Syrian coast. Now they turned toward Egypt, the last great Bronze Age civilization still standing, wealthy and seemingly vulnerable. But Egypt was not yet ready to fall. Ramesses III, though his name consciously evoked the great Ramesses II, and though his reign would be Egypt's last gasp of imperial power, was a capable military leader. When the Sea Peoples, approached by land through Palestine and by sea along the coast, Ramesses met them with the full might of Egyptian arms. The land battle occurred somewhere in southern Palestine. Egyptian reliefs at Ramesses's mortuary temple at Medinet Habu show the pharaoh in his chariot, trampling enemies, firing arrows, maintaining the traditional iconography of divine kingship, victorious over chaos. The reality was probably more prosaic, a hard-fought battle between professional armies, but Egyptian discipline and organization prevailed. The land invasion was thrown back. More dramatically, the naval battle in the Nile Delta represented one of the first major sea battles in recorded history. The Sea People's ships, distinctive vessels with high prows and sterns decorated with bird heads, sailed into the delta's waters expecting to land unopposed. Instead, they found the Egyptian fleet waiting. Egyptian archers lined the shore, ships grappled and boarded each other. Men fought hand-to-hand on swaying decks. The water turned red with blood. The reliefs at Medinet Habu show the battle's aftermath. Sea People's ships capsizing, bodies floating in the water, Egyptian soldiers dragging captives ashore, the pharaoh standing victorious, while scribes count the severed hands of the slain enemies. Ramesses had won. Egypt had survived when so many other civilizations had not. But the victory came at tremendous cost. The wars drained Egypt's treasury. The disruption of Mediterranean trade networks isolated Egypt economically. The empire in the Levant, already weakened, could not be fully restored. The Sea Peoples, though defeated in Egypt, settled in Palestine and the Levantine coast, creating new political realities that Egypt could not easily control. And after Ramesses III's death around 1155 BC, Egypt entered terminal decline. The pharaohs who followed him were weak, their reigns short and ineffective. The 20th dynasty sputtered to its end. The new kingdom's power, its empire, its golden age of military dominance and cultural achievement, was over. Egypt had survived the Bronze Age collapse, but it had not emerged unchanged. The tide from the sea had been pushed back, but it had marked the high water point of Egyptian power. From this moment forward, the current would flow in only one direction, outward, downward, into the twilight of the god-kings, the divided kingdom. The third intermediate period, spanning roughly 1069 to 664 BC, saw Egypt fragment once again into competing power centers, repeating the pattern of the first and second intermediate periods, but under circumstances far more complex and with outcomes far more ambiguous. The 21st dynasty ruled from Tanis in the eastern delta, maintaining the fiction of national unity but exercising real control over only Lower Egypt. Meanwhile, the high priests of Amun in Thebes governed Upper Egypt as an independent, theocratic state. Egypt was divided not by civil war but by tacit agreement, the two lands splitting into separate realms that maintained diplomatic relations with each other while acknowledging no superior authority. This division would have been unthinkable to earlier Egyptians, a violation of Ma'at so profound as to threaten cosmic order itself. But by the third intermediate period, Egyptian civilization had grown tired. Its old certainties eroded, its energy for maintaining unity exhausted. Foreign dynasties began to rule portions of Egypt. Libyan chiefs, descendants of mercenaries and settlers who had been coming into Egypt for centuries, established themselves as pharaohs of the 22nd and 23rd dynasties. They adopted Egyptian titles, performed Egyptian rituals, presented themselves as legitimate rulers maintaining the ancient traditions. But they were, undeniably, foreigners, and their rule marked another fracture in the edifice of pharaonic ideology. In the far south, beyond Egypt proper, the kingdom of Kush in Nubia grew powerful. The Kushites had absorbed Egyptian culture during centuries of Egyptian domination. They worshipped Egyptian gods, used hieroglyphic writing, built pyramids for their kings. In some ways, they had become more Egyptian than Egypt itself, preserving traditions that Egypt was letting slip. Around 747 BC, a Kushite king named Pa marched north with his armies, conquering Egypt and establishing the 25th dynasty, the Nubian dynasty. The conquered were conquered by those they had once ruled. The tables had turned completely. The Kushite pharaohs presented themselves as restorers of Ma'at, as pious devotees of Amun, come to rescue Egypt from the chaos of division and foreign Libyan rule. They built extensively at Thebes, renovating temples, adding to Karnak, demonstrating their commitment to traditional Egyptian religion. They adopted the full titulary of pharaonic kingship, the 5 names, the crowns, the regalia, yet they could not restore Egyptian unity or power in any meaningful sense. Egypt was no longer a major player in regional politics. The Assyrian Empire, the new superpower of the Near East, was expanding westward. Egyptian influence in the Levant had evaporated entirely. The economy was weak. The administrative structures were fragmented. Egypt was living on past glory, maintaining the forms of pharaonic civilization while the substance drained away. During this period, Egyptians began looking backward with nostalgia and longing. Texts were copied from earlier periods, particularly Middle Kingdom classics. Art styles consciously imitated Old Kingdom forms. Names were revived from ancient dynasties. This archaizing tendency, this attempt to recapture lost greatness by returning to earlier models, would characterize much of late Egyptian culture. But nostalgia cannot substitute for vitality. Egypt was changing in ways that could not be undone by looking backward. Foreign peoples had settled throughout the delta. Trade connections were with new powers, new civilizations. The Mediterranean world was transforming, and Egypt was being left behind. Magnificent, but increasingly irrelevant. Ancient and venerable, but no longer innovative or dynamic. The Kushite pharaohs ruled for about 70 years, maintaining a semblance of unity and traditional authority. But they could not hold back the tide of history. The Assyrians were coming, and when Assyrian armies finally swept into Egypt in the mid-7th century BC, even the Kushite pharaohs would prove unable to defend the Black Land from foreign conquest. The age of independent Egyptian power was ending. The age of foreign domination was beginning. Egypt would remain Egypt in culture and identity. But politically, it would increasingly be the prize fought over by foreign empires rather than a power in its own right. The Persian shadow. In 525 BC, Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great and king of the Persian Empire, led his armies across the Sinai and into Egypt. At the Battle of Pelusium, the fortified city guarding Egypt's northeastern frontier, Persian forces overwhelmed Egyptian defences. Pharaoh Psamtik III, the last native ruler of the 26th dynasty, was defeated, captured, and eventually executed. Egypt became a satrapy, a province of the Persian Empire. The Persians were not the first foreigners to rule Egypt. The Hyksos, the Kushites, even the Assyrians briefly, had held Egyptian territory, but the Persian conquest was different in scale and duration. The Persian Empire was vast, stretching from India to the Mediterranean, and Egypt was now just one province among many in this enormous imperial system. Cambyses, according to Egyptian sources, was a tyrant who violated sacred traditions. The later Egyptian historian Manetho claimed Cambyses killed the sacred Apis bull and desecrated temples. Whether these accounts are accurate or propaganda designed to delegitimize Persian rule is uncertain. What is clear is that Egyptians resented foreign domination, Persian or otherwise. Yet the Persians were practical rulers. They understood that Egypt's cooperation made governance easier than constant rebellion. Later Persian kings, particularly Darius I, adopted pharaonic titulary, presented themselves as legitimate successors to the native dynasties, contributed to temple construction, and attempted to govern according to Egyptian expectations. Darius completed the canal, linking the Nile to the Red Sea, an engineering project that facilitated trade. He codified Egyptian law, commissioning a systematic compilation of legal traditions. He appointed Egyptian officials to administrative positions, working within existing structures rather than imposing entirely foreign systems. But none of this made Persian rule truly acceptable to Egyptian consciousness. A foreigner on the throne of Horus was a violation of cosmic order, regardless of how benevolently he ruled. The Persian kings might perform the rituals and bear the titles, but they were not the divine intermediaries that Egyptian theology required. Ma'at was compromised at its foundation. Egypt rebelled repeatedly against Persian rule. Around 461 BC, an Egyptian named Inaros led a major revolt, securing support from Athens and controlling much of the Delta and Upper Egypt for several years, before Persian forces finally suppressed the rebellion. Later revolts followed, brief periods of independence, punctuating longer periods of Persian domination. The 28th, 29th, and 30th dynasties, spanning roughly 404 to 343 BC, represent Egypt's last independent native dynasties. These pharaohs, ruling from various delta cities, maintained Egyptian traditions, built temples, and fought continuously against Persian attempts at reconquest. Nectanebo II, the last native Egyptian pharaoh, ruled from 360 to 343 BC. He was a prolific builder, adding extensively to temples throughout Egypt. He strengthened fortifications. He allied with Greek city-states against Persia. He tried desperately to preserve Egyptian independence. But in 343 BC, the Persians returned in overwhelming force. Nectanebo's defences crumbled. He fled south to Nubia, disappearing from history. Egypt became a Persian satrapy once more, and this time there would be no Egyptian restoration. This second period of Persian rule, sometimes called the 31st dynasty, was harsh. Persian forces occupied Egypt as conquerors, not attempting the conciliation of earlier Persian rule. Taxes were heavy, Egyptian resentment simmered. The temples mourned the loss of legitimate pharaonic kingship, but the Persians' second domination of Egypt would not last long. A new power was rising in the west, a power that would transform the entire Eastern Mediterranean world and create a new synthesis of Egyptian and foreign cultures that would define Egypt's final centuries as an independent cultural entity. In 332 BC, Alexander of Macedon, called Alexander the Great, marched into Egypt at the head of his Macedonian and Greek armies. The Persians, hated occupiers, fled without serious resistance. And the Egyptians, desperate for liberation from Persian rule, welcomed Alexander as a savior, perhaps even as a legitimate pharaoh, sent by the gods to restore Ma'at to the suffering land. You tend the sacred ibises. You are a priest of Thoth in the temple at Hermopolis, and you are feeding the sacred ibises, as your father did before you, and as his father did before him, maintaining traditions that reach back centuries, perhaps millennia, even as the world outside the temple changes in ways you struggle to understand. The year is 310 BC. Alexander the Great came and went, a god king who liberated Egypt from the hated Persians, who visited the oracle at Siwa, and was proclaimed son of Amun, who founded the city of Alexandria on the coast. Then he departed to conquer more of the world, and Egypt has not seen him since. Word came last year that he died in Babylon, far from Egypt, and now his generals fight over the corpse of his empire like jackals over carrion. But here, in the sacred precincts of Thoth's temple, the eternal rhythms continue unchanged. You carry a basket of fish, small Nile fish caught this morning by the temple's fishermen. The ibises gather around you, their long, curved beaks probing, their white plumage brilliant in the morning sun. These birds are sacred to Thoth, god of wisdom, of writing, of the moon, of magic and knowledge. Each bird is a living manifestation of the god's presence, and to care for them is to serve Thoth directly. You scatter the fish. The ibises feed with quick, efficient movements. You know many of these individual birds, have watched them for years, recognize their behaviors and habits. When they die, they will be mummified with the same care given to human nobles, wrapped in linen, placed in special containers, buried in the sacred animal necropolis. Hundreds of thousands of ibis mummies rest in the underground galleries, offerings to Thoth, gifts from pilgrims who purchase the mummified birds to dedicate to the god. The temple itself is ancient beyond memory. These walls have stood since the Old Kingdom, since the pyramid builders. The hieroglyphs carved on the columns speak of pharaohs whose names you recite in the liturgies, though their actual reigns are lost in the mists of time. The sanctuary holds Thoth's statue, the ibis-headed god rendered in stone and precious metals, and each day you help perform the rituals of awakening, feeding, clothing the divine image. These rituals have not changed. Not when the Assyrians came, not when the Persians ruled, not when Alexander arrived with his Macedonian phalanx and his Greek philosophers. The foreigners come and go, claiming to be pharaohs, performing some approximation of the sacred rites. But here, in Thoth's temple, the true traditions persist. You are wary of the changes you see beyond the temple walls. Alexandria, they say, is becoming a great city, drawing scholars and merchants from across the Mediterranean world. Greeks settle throughout Egypt, bringing their language, their customs, their gods. They worship Zeus and Apollo and Athena, foreign deities who have no place in the eternal order of Ma'at. Yet the Greeks seem fascinated by Egyptian wisdom. They come to the temples seeking knowledge, wanting to learn the sacred writing, the astronomy, the mathematics that Egyptian priests have preserved for millennia. They equate their gods with yours, saying Zeus is Amun, Hermes is Thoth, creating confusing syncretisms that trouble your understanding of proper theology. The new ruler, Ptolemy, one of Alexander's generals who has claimed Egypt for himself, styles himself pharaoh. He has taken Egyptian titles, commissioned temple reliefs, showing himself making offerings to the gods in traditional style. But you have seen him, He is Greek. He speaks Greek. His court is Greek. He is Pharaoh in name only, wearing the crowns like costumes, performing rituals he does not truly understand. Still, he supports the temples. The offerings continue. The lands that provide the temple's income remain under temple control. Ptolemy seems to understand that maintaining Egyptian religion keeps the native population pacified, accepting of foreign rule, and so the temples persist, islands of traditional culture in a changing Egypt. You finish feeding the ibises and turn toward the temple's interior. The stone is cool under your bare feet. The air smells of incense, myrrh, and frankincense, the eternal sense of sacred space. You pass through columned halls, your path so familiar you could walk it in complete darkness. In the sanctuary, the older priests are beginning the morning ritual. You join them, adding your voice to the ancient chants, performing the gestures your teachers taught you exactly as they were taught by their teachers in an unbroken chain, reaching back to the first time, to the moment when the gods walked the earth and established the proper order of all things. The world outside may change. Foreign kings may come and go. Languages and customs may shift and blend. But here, in Thoth's temple, in this timeless space of ritual and devotion, Egypt endures. You tend the sacred ibises. You perform the ancient rites. You preserve the wisdom of the ancestors. And in doing so, you maintain your small portion of Ma'at, keeping chaos at bay one day at a time, one ritual at a time, one generation passing knowledge to the next in the eternal cycle. The gods are patient. Egypt is eternal. Foreign rule is temporary, a passing shadow. Or so you tell yourself, so you must believe. To make sense of a world that seems increasingly distant from the eternal truths your temple guards. Alexander's pilgrimage. In the winter of 332 BC, after being crowned pharaoh in Memphis, according to the ancient rituals, after founding the city that would bear his name on the Mediterranean coast, Alexander did something that surprised even his closest companions. He announced he would travel to Siwa, the remote oasis temple of Amun, deep in the western desert, to consult the oracle there. His generals thought the journey mad. Siwa lay hundreds of miles west through some of the harshest desert terrain in Egypt. The route was dangerous, water scarce, the way uncertain. Alexander had campaigns to plan, an empire to organize, armies waiting. Why risk his life for some Egyptian oracle? But Alexander was not merely a conqueror. He was a man who believed in his own destiny, who saw himself as favored by the gods, who sought divine confirmation of what he already suspected, that he was more than mortal, that greatness beyond normal human achievement was his birthright. The journey nearly killed him. His small party, perhaps a few hundred men, travelled west from the coast. They followed the ancient caravan routes when they could find them. They rationed water carefully. They navigated by the sun and stars when sandstorms obliterated all other landmarks. At one point, according to accounts written later, they lost their way completely. The water was almost gone. Death seemed certain. Then, the storytellers say, crows appeared, flying ahead of the party, leading them to an oasis. Or perhaps it was snakes, or divine intervention. The accounts vary, but all agree that Alexander's group survived against odds that should have killed them. When they finally reached Siwa, Alexander entered the temple alone. What happened in his private consultation with the oracle, no one knows for certain. Alexander never revealed the full details. But when he emerged, he announced that the oracle had confirmed what he had suspected. He was the son of Zeus Amun, of the supreme god in both Greek and Egyptian theology. To the Greeks in his entourage, this claim was troubling, perhaps blasphemous. Greek tradition had heroes descended from gods, demigods like Heracles, but for a living man to claim divine parentage was to cross a dangerous line. To the Egyptians, however, it made perfect sense. Every pharaoh was the son of the gods. Every pharaoh was Horus incarnate. Alexander, by Egyptian theology, had merely acknowledged the truth that came with wearing the double crown. Alexander believed the oracle. Whether he believed it in the literal way, Egyptians believed their pharaohs were gods, or whether he believed it in some more complex philosophical sense, is impossible to determine. But the confirmation at Siwa fed his already considerable self-confidence. He was destined for greatness. He was divinely favored. He would conquer the known world, and he would do it with the gods' blessing. He left Siwa and returned to the Mediterranean coast. He reorganized Egypt's administration, appointing both Macedonian and Egyptian officials in a careful balancing act designed to secure the loyalty of his new province. He gave instructions for the construction of Alexandria, the city that would become the intellectual and economic center of the Hellenistic world. Then he marched east, toward Persia, toward the heart of the empire he intended to destroy and replace with his own. Egypt would not see him again. He would conquer Persia. He would march to India. He would dream of reaching the ends of the earth. And he would die at 32 in Babylon, his vast empire immediately fragmenting as his generals fought for the pieces. But his visit to Siwa would resonate through Egyptian history. It established the precedent that Greek rulers of Egypt could be legitimate pharaohs if they sought the gods' confirmation, if they performed the proper rituals, if they presented themselves as maintainers of Ma'at rather than foreign conquerors. The Ptolemies, the dynasty that would rule Egypt for the next 3 centuries, would build on Alexander's foundation. They would be Greek in culture and language and governance, but they would also be pharaohs in Egyptian tradition, wearing the crowns, performing the rituals, building the temples, maintaining the fiction, increasingly real with each generation, that they were Egypt's legitimate divine kings. Alexander's pilgrimage to Siwa was more than religious theatre. It was the moment when Greek and Egyptian civilizations began their complex, productive, ultimately tragic synthesis that would define Egypt's final centuries of independence. The Greek pharaohs, after Alexander's death in 323 BC, his general Ptolemy, son of Lagus, seized Egypt and established a dynasty that would rule for nearly 3 centuries, presiding over a unique fusion of Greek and Egyptian cultures that created something new, neither purely Greek nor purely Egyptian, but a Hellenistic synthesis that would influence the entire Mediterranean world. Ptolemy I Soter, as he styled himself, Ptolemy the Saviour, was a shrewd politician and administrator. He understood that to rule Egypt successfully, he needed to present himself as a legitimate pharaoh to the native Egyptian population, while maintaining his Greek identity for the Macedonian soldiers and Greek settlers, who were his primary base of power. He became a master of dual presentation, Greek to Greeks, Egyptian to Egyptians. To Egyptians, Ptolemy appeared in temple reliefs, wearing the double crown, making offerings to the gods in traditional style, inscribed in hieroglyphs, with a full 5-part titulary of pharaonic kingship. He restored and expanded temples, endowing them with land and income, presenting himself as the pious upholder of Ma'at. The native priesthoods, in exchange for royal patronage, legitimized Ptolemaic rule, declaring the Ptolemies to be true pharaohs blessed by the gods. To Greeks, Ptolemy was a Macedonian general, a companion of Alexander, a Hellenistic monarch ruling according to Greek administrative traditions. His court spoke Greek. His soldiers were organized in Macedonian phalanxes. His city, Alexandria, was a Greek polis, the most magnificent city of the Hellenistic world, with its great library, its museum, its lighthouse, its cosmopolitan culture, drawing scholars and artists from across the Mediterranean. The synthesis worked, for a time, remarkably well. The Ptolemies exploited Egypt's agricultural wealth, the Nile's reliable floods, making Egypt the grain basket of the Eastern Mediterranean. They established efficient tax collection through Greek administrators working with native Egyptian officials. They monopolized key industries, controlling the production and sale of oil, salt, papyrus, textiles. They accumulated wealth on a staggering scale. Alexandria became the intellectual capital of the ancient world. The Library of Alexandria, founded under Ptolemy I, and expanded by his successors, aimed to collect all human knowledge, every book written in every language. Scholars came from across the Greek world to study there. Euclid wrote his Elements of Geometry in Alexandria. Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference there. Aristarchus proposed a heliocentric model of the solar system there. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, was produced in Alexandria. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, guided ships into the harbour and proclaimed Ptolemaic magnificence to all who approached by sea. The Ptolemies also created new religious syncretisms. Ptolemy I and his advisor Timotheus, a Greek priest, working with the Egyptian priest Manetho, created the cult of Serapis, a god deliberately designed to appeal to both Greeks and Egyptians. Serapis combined attributes of the Egyptian Osiris and Apis with Greek Zeus and Hades, presented in Greek artistic style, but performing Egyptian theological functions. The Serapeum in Alexandria became a major cult centre. Competing with traditional Egyptian temples, this religious creativity extended to other areas. Isis, the Egyptian goddess, was reinterpreted in ways that made her accessible to Greek worshippers. Her cult spread throughout the Mediterranean world, reaching Rome and beyond, becoming one of the most popular mystery religions of the ancient world. The Egyptian goddess had become a universal deity, her worship transcending cultural boundaries in ways that would have been impossible in earlier periods. Yet beneath the magnificent synthesis, tensions simmered. Greeks and Macedonians occupied the highest positions of power and prestige. They controlled the army, dominated commerce, received the best land grants. Native Egyptians, even educated ones, faced a glass ceiling. They could become priests or local administrators, but the real power lay with Greeks. Egyptian revolts erupted periodically, particularly in Upper Egypt, where traditional Egyptian culture remained strongest. The Thebaid, the region around Thebes, rebelled several times, requiring military campaigns to suppress. These revolts were not merely political but cultural, rejections of foreign rule and foreign influence, assertions of Egyptian identity against Greek dominance. The later Ptolemies faced increasing difficulties. Palace intrigue became murderous. Brother fought sister, mother fought son, in succession crises that weakened the dynasty. The wealth that earlier Ptolemies had accumulated was squandered on civil wars and luxury. The professional army declined, the administration became corrupt and inefficient, and Rome was rising. The Roman Republic, and later Empire, increasingly dominated Mediterranean politics. The Ptolemies became clients of Rome, dependent on Roman support to maintain their throne. They paid tribute, accepted Roman advisors, deferred to Roman interests. The fiction of Ptolemaic independence became thinner with each generation. The Rosetta Stone, inscribed in 196 BC during the reign of Ptolemy V, reveals the complex reality of late Ptolemaic rule. The same decree is written in 3 scripts: hieroglyphic Egyptian for the traditional priesthood, Demotic Egyptian for common native use, and Greek for the ruling class. 3 languages, 3 cultures, existing side by side in uneasy synthesis, held together by royal authority that was already fraying. By the 1st century BC, Egypt's fate was tied to Rome's internal politics. The Ptolemies survived only by aligning with whichever Roman faction seemed dominant, and when the last Ptolemaic ruler, a woman of exceptional intelligence and political skill, made her final gambit for independence, she would fail not because she lacked ability, but because the age of Hellenistic kingdoms was ending and the age of Roman Empire was beginning. Cleopatra's gambit. She was born in 69 BC, the daughter of Ptolemy XII, and she became Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, the final ruler of a dynasty that had endured for 3 centuries, and the last monarch of independent Egypt for over 2,000 years. Cleopatra was not ethnically Egyptian. Her ancestry was Macedonian Greek, though after 300 years of Ptolemaic rule, some Egyptian blood had likely entered the dynasty through secondary wives. But she was the first Ptolemaic ruler to learn the Egyptian language, to read hieroglyphs, to engage seriously with native Egyptian culture, rather than merely wearing pharaonic costume for temple reliefs. She was educated in the best Hellenistic tradition, trained in rhetoric, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy. She spoke perhaps 9 languages. She was intellectually brilliant, politically astute, personally charismatic, and utterly determined to preserve Egyptian independence in a Mediterranean world increasingly dominated by Rome. When she ascended to the throne in 51 BC, she inherited a kingdom in crisis. Egypt was deeply in debt to Rome. The treasury was depleted. Her father had mortgaged Egypt's future to maintain his throne, and she was forced to rule jointly with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, as her father's will specified, though she quickly tried to sideline him and rule alone. This provoked a civil war. Ptolemy XIII's advisors drove Cleopatra from Alexandria. She fled to Syria, raised an army, and prepared to fight for her throne. But before the civil war could reach its climax, Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria, pursuing his rival Pompey after the Battle of Pharsalus. Cleopatra seized the opportunity. In one of history's most famous episodes, she had herself smuggled into Caesar's presence, supposedly rolled up in a carpet, and presented herself to the Roman dictator. Caesar was 52, she was 21. He was the most powerful man in the world. She needed his support to regain her throne. Whether theirs was a love affair or a political alliance, disguised as romance, remains debated. Probably it was both. An attraction founded on mutual interest and genuine fascination with each other's intelligence and power. Caesar supported Cleopatra against her brother. In the Alexandrian War that followed, Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile. Cleopatra was restored to sole power, and she bore Caesar a son she named Caesarion, Little Caesar. Claiming the child was Caesar's heir, Cleopatra followed Caesar to Rome, living there as his guest while he ruled the Republic. She was present in Rome when Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March, 44 BC. She fled back to Egypt, her position suddenly precarious again, with her Roman patron dead. The Roman civil wars that followed Caesar's death created new dangers and opportunities. Mark Antony, one of the triumvirs fighting for control of Rome's eastern territories, summoned Cleopatra to meet him at Tarsus in 41 BC. She came, but not as a suppliant. She arrived sailing up the river in a golden barge with purple sails, dressed as Aphrodite, the goddess of love, attended by servants costumed as cupids. It was theatrical, magnificent, calculated to overwhelm. Antony, like Caesar before him, was captivated. They became lovers, political allies, eventually husband and wife, by Egyptian custom, though not by Roman law, since Antony was married to Octavia, sister of Caesar's heir, Octavian. Cleopatra bore Antony 3 children. Together, they dreamed of ruling the eastern Mediterranean as a Hellenistic monarchy independent of Rome. It was a doomed dream. Octavian, calculating and ruthless, recognized Cleopatra as a threat not merely to Roman interests but to his own power. He waged a propaganda campaign portraying Antony as enslaved by an Eastern witch queen, presenting the conflict as Rome versus Egypt, civilization versus barbarism, proper Roman virtue versus decadent foreign corruption. The war came to its climax at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. Antony and Cleopatra's combined fleet faced Octavian's navy off the western coast of Greece. The battle was not decisively won by superior tactics, but by defections and failures of nerve. Cleopatra's ships withdrew from the battle, and Antony followed her, abandoning his fleet. The defeat was complete. They fled back to Egypt, but there was no escape. Octavian invaded Egypt the following year. Resistance collapsed. Antony, hearing a false report that Cleopatra had died, fell on his sword. Cleopatra was captured and brought before Octavian. She was 39 years old, her kingdom lost, her children's fates uncertain. Octavian intended to take her to Rome to parade in his triumph, a captive queen displayed as proof of Roman victory. But Cleopatra chose death over that humiliation. On August 12, 30 BC, in her palace in Alexandria, Cleopatra died, probably by poison, though tradition says she allowed an asp, a venomous snake, sacred to Egyptian religion, to bite her. Whether the snake story is true or romantic invention, it carries symbolic weight. Cleopatra died as pharaoh, the Uraeus serpent on the crown, delivering death and final sovereignty. With her died the Ptolemaic dynasty. With her died the last remnant of the Hellenistic kingdoms Alexander's conquests had created, with her died independent Egypt after 3,000 years. Octavian, soon to become Augustus, the first Roman emperor, annexed Egypt as his personal property, not even a normal Roman province, but the emperor's private domain. Cleopatra had gambled everything, her throne, her life, her children's futures, on the possibility that Rome's civil wars might allow Egypt to maintain independence, that alliance with the right Roman faction might preserve Egyptian sovereignty. She had lost, not because she lacked intelligence, courage, or political skill, but because the entire system of Hellenistic kingdoms was ending, swept away by Roman imperial power. But in losing, she became immortal in ways she could not have anticipated. Her story would be told and retold for 2,000 years. Her name would become synonymous with female power, exotic beauty, tragic romance. The fall of Egypt, she would be vilified and romanticized, misunderstood and mythologized, transformed from historical figure into eternal archetype. The last pharaoh would become timeless legend. Sand reclaims the temples. The temples are empty now. The priests are gone. The rituals have ceased. Where once incense smoke rose daily to the gods, where once chants echoed through columned halls, where once the sanctuary doors opened each dawn to wake the divine images, there is only silence now. The silence of abandonment, the silence of endings. The Roman emperors who rule Egypt do not understand. They see the temples as quaint relics, tourist attractions, sources of stone for new construction projects. They do not comprehend that these were not merely buildings but dwelling places of the gods, points of contact between human and divine realms, essential machinery for maintaining cosmic order. The sands begin their patient work. Wind carries grains through the abandoned doorways. They settle in corners. They accumulate in courtyards where priests once walked in purification rituals. Slowly, incrementally, the desert reclaims what the Nile's gift had once held back. The painted reliefs fade, their brilliant colours dulled by centuries of sunlight streaming through open doors no longer sealed at night. The carved hieroglyphs remain, messages from the ancient world, growing harder to read as drifting sand scours their surfaces. The statues stand in their niches, guardian figures watching over emptiness, their painted eyes staring into darkness as oil lamps burn no more. In some temples, new religions establish themselves. Christian monks occupy the abandoned halls, carving crosses over pharaonic cartouches, plastering over pagan scenes with biblical frescoes, transforming the houses of Amun and Isis and Horus into monasteries dedicated to the new god who came from Palestine. The old gods are declared demons now, false idols, temptations to be resisted. Their images are defaced, their names chiseled away, erased from the walls that proclaimed their power for millennia. The knowledge dies with the priests. The last person who could read hieroglyphics naturally, who learned the sacred writing as living script rather than archaeological puzzle, dies sometime around the 4th or 5th century AD. The ability to read the voices of the ancestors passes from the world. The texts remain carved in stone, inked on papyrus, but they have become incomprehensible, mysterious signs, whose meanings are lost. The Nile still floods, though the floods are managed differently now, understood through different frameworks. No longer attributed to Hapi's blessing or Isis's tears, but to natural cycles that happen without divine intervention. The sun still rises over the desert cliffs, but it is no longer resailing his barca across the heavens. The patterns continue, but the meanings have changed. In the necropolis, tomb robbers work openly now, no longer fearing divine retribution for violating the resting places of the dead. They strip the gold from mummies, tear apart the wrappings looking for amulets and jewellery, scatter the bones carelessly. The carefully preserved bodies that were meant to house the ka for eternity are destroyed for whatever small treasures they might contain. The sand continues its work. It fills the tombs, it buries the temples, it covers the forgotten statues and the abandoned cities. The desert that Egypt held at bay for 3,000 years is patient, and it is winning now, grain by grain, century by century, reclaiming what was always its own. But beneath the sand, protected by the very force that buries them. The monuments wait, the hieroglyphs wait, the mummies wait, the treasures wait. They sleep in the desert's embrace, preserved by Egypt's dry heat and buried sand, waiting for a future age, when curiosity will bring new investigators, when scholarship will rediscover the lost knowledge, when the voices of the ancestors will speak again to those patient enough to listen, and clever enough to decipher the ancient signs. The gods sleep now in their buried temples. Or perhaps they have departed entirely, withdrawn to whatever realm divine beings inhabit when their worshippers abandon them. The question goes unanswered in the settling silence and the drifting sand. The eternal return. For over 14 centuries, Egypt's ancient voice was silent. The hieroglyphs remained, carved on temple walls, painted on coffins, inked on papyri, but no one alive could read them. The language was dead, the meaning was lost. Egypt had become a mystery, a land of enigmatic monuments and incomprehensible writing, visited by travellers who could only wonder at the ruins and invent fanciful explanations for what they saw. Then, in 1822 AD, a French scholar named Jean-François Champollion, working with the Rosetta Stone and years of careful linguistic analysis, achieved what had seemed impossible. He deciphered the hieroglyphs. He gave voice back to the ancient Egyptians. The dead began to speak again. The Rosetta Stone, discovered by French soldiers during Napoleon's Egyptian expedition in 1799 AD, had been the key. The stone bore the same decree in 3 scripts: hieroglyphic, demotic, and Greek. Since Greek could be read, scholars realized that if they could match the Greek text to the hieroglyphic version, they might crack the code. But the task was enormously difficult. Earlier attempts by the English polymath, Thomas Young and others, had made progress, establishing that some hieroglyphs represented sounds, but the full decipherment eluded them. Champollion, who had taught himself Coptic, the last descendant of the ancient Egyptian language surviving in Christian liturgy, brought crucial insights. He realized that hieroglyphic writing was not purely symbolic or purely phonetic, but a complex system combining both. When Champollion finally broke the code, when he could read the names of Ptolemy and Cleopatra in the hieroglyphs, and from there begin unlocking the entire system, he allegedly ran through Paris shouting, "Je tiens l'affaire! I've got it!" Then he fainted from excitement. It was a resurrection. 3,000 years of Egyptian history, literature, religion, science, law, philosophy, all recorded in hieroglyphic and hieratic and demotic texts, suddenly became accessible again. The ancestors could speak. Their words could be heard across the millennia. Egyptology was born as a scientific discipline. Scholars began systematic study of Egypt's monuments, not as exotic curiosities, but as historical and cultural treasures. Museums collected artifacts. Universities established departments. Excavations began, not treasure hunting but careful archaeological investigation. In 1858 AD, Auguste Mariette, a French archaeologist, established what would become the Egyptian Antiquities Service and the Cairo Museum, attempting to stop the wholesale looting of Egypt's heritage and preserve it for study. Egypt's past became recognized as valuable, not merely for gold and curious objects, but for the knowledge it contained about one of humanity's oldest and greatest civilizations. The discoveries came rapidly. In 1867 AD, workers digging near Thebes uncovered a cache of royal mummies, pharaohs hidden by ancient priests to protect them from tomb robbers. The mummies of Ramesses II, Thutmose III, Seti I, and other great kings were found jumbled together, their gold stripped away, but their bodies preserved. The god-kings had endured, if not in the eternal splendor they had prepared for, at least in physical form, their faces still recognizable after 3,000 years. In 1887 AD, a peasant woman discovered the Amarna letters, the cuneiform diplomatic correspondence that revealed the international relations of the Late Bronze Age and Egypt's complex interactions with other great powers. History that had been lost was suddenly recovered, entire diplomatic systems revealed through clay tablets preserved in the ruins of Akhenaten's abandoned capital. And then, in November of 1922 AD, Howard Carter, a British archaeologist, made the discovery that would captivate the world's imagination more than any other. In the Valley of the Kings, in a small tomb that had been overlooked and forgotten, buried under debris from later excavations, Carter found the only royal tomb of the New Kingdom to survive substantially intact. When Carter peered through the hole he had made in the sealed doorway, holding a candle to illuminate the darkness, he saw treasures glittering in the flickering light. "Can you see anything?" his patron Lord Carnarvon asked. "Yes," Carter replied. "Wonderful things." The tomb was Tutankhamun's, the boy king who had restored the traditional gods after Akhenaten's revolution, who had reigned briefly and died young and been buried hastily. His tomb was not particularly large, his reign not particularly important, but because it had remained hidden and sealed, it preserved treasures beyond imagination. The clearance of the tomb took 10 years. Carter found nested coffins of gilded wood and solid gold. He found a golden death mask of exquisite beauty, the idealized features of the young pharaoh, rendered in gold and lapis and obsidian. He found thrones, chariots, weapons, clothing, furniture, games, musical instruments, food, wine, every provision for the afterlife. He found Tutankhamun's mummy, still resting in its sarcophagus, wrapped in linen embedded with amulets. The discovery became a worldwide sensation. Tutankhamun, obscure in his own time, became the most famous pharaoh of all. The treasures toured the world, drawing millions of visitors. The golden mask became an icon, perhaps the single most recognizable artifact from the ancient world. But beyond the treasure, beyond the spectacular objects, the discovery revealed something more important. It showed how even a minor pharaoh was buried, with what care and reverence, with what absolute conviction that death was not ending but transformation. If this was the tomb of an unimportant king who reigned only 9 years, what must the tombs of truly great pharaohs have contained before they were robbed? The rediscovery of Egypt continues. New tombs are found, new texts are translated, new understanding emerges from old evidence. DNA analysis of royal mummies reveals family relationships. CT scans show diseases and injuries. Chemical analysis of residues tells us what Egyptians ate and drank. Scientific techniques unimaginable to the ancient Egyptians themselves now reveal their secrets, and through all of this, the ancient Egyptians achieve a kind of immortality they did not anticipate. They wanted their names to endure, spoken by the living, sustaining their ka in the afterlife. Their names do endure, not because priests recite them in temple rituals, but because scholars study them, because museums display their works, because millions of people around the world learn their history and marvel at their achievements. They wanted to build for eternity. They succeeded. The pyramids still stand. The temples still proclaim their gods' names. The tombs still house the royal dead. And now, through scholarship and preservation, through museums and universities, through books and documentaries, and the passionate interest of people who will never visit Egypt, but who are fascinated by its ancient glory, the pharaohs live on. It is not the eternity they imagined, but it is eternity nonetheless. The museum's vigil, the museum is closed. The visitors have departed. The lights have dimmed to the minimum needed for security. In the display cases, in the carefully controlled atmosphere where temperature and humidity are monitored constantly, the artifacts rest, golden jewelry catches, and reflects the dim light. Painted coffins show scenes from the Book of the Dead, the journey through the underworld rendered in pigments that have not faded despite 30 centuries. Stone statues stand in eternal watchfulness, their carved eyes seeming almost alive in the half-darkness. The mummy cases line the walls, standing upright, presenting the gilded faces of the dead to the living world they can no longer see. Inside each case, wrapped in linen, preserved by natron and resin and the desert's dry embrace, a human body rests. Someone who lived, loved, worked, dreamed 3,000 years ago. Someone who believed that this preservation would allow their ka to endure forever, would enable their resurrection in the field of reeds. Did they achieve resurrection? Not in the way they imagined, but they endure. Their bodies have lasted. Their names are known. Millions of living people have looked upon their faces, wondered about their lives, connected across the vast gulf of time with these ancient souls. The golden mask of Tutankhamun gleams in its climate-controlled case. Perhaps the most visited object in any museum anywhere, the youthful features, idealized and perfect, represent not just one boy king, but the entire civilization that created him, preserved him, intended him to last forever. The lapis lazuli and turquoise inlays create a face of otherworldly beauty. The cobra and vulture on the brow still proclaim divine kingship. The gold still catches light, as it did, when it was placed on the mummy 3,300 years ago. Around the main galleries, smaller objects tell their own stories. A wooden spoon carved in the shape of a swimming girl, a pair of sandals woven from papyrus, a child's toy, a wooden animal on wheels, a letter written on papyrus, personal correspondence about everyday matters, preserved by accident in the dry sand. These objects make the ancient Egyptians human, not just pharaohs and priests and monumental builders, but people who used spoons and wore sandals and played with toys and wrote letters. The hieroglyphs on the walls speak now to those who can read them, though they remained silent for over a millennium. Hymns to the gods, royal decrees, funerary spells, historical annals, love poems, medical texts, mathematical problems, the full range of human expression, carved and painted and written, preserved and rediscovered and translated. The night security guard walks through on his rounds, his footsteps echoing in the empty halls. He has worked here for years, walked among these ancient dead countless times, but he still feels something in the silent galleries. Not fear, but a kind of awe. These objects have lasted longer than entire civilizations. They have witnessed the rise and fall of empires. They have endured. In the paleontology wing, dinosaur fossils are millions of years old, but they are bones, mineralized rock, not the original organic material. Here, in the Egyptian galleries, the wood is still wood, the linen still linen, the paint still paint. The preservation is miraculous, a gift of Egypt's climate and the ancient embalmer's skill. The artifacts wait in the darkness, patient as they have always been patient. When morning comes, the lights will brighten, the visitors will return, pressing close to the cases, taking photographs, reading the explanatory placards, trying to comprehend the vast span of time these objects represent. Some visitors will be moved to tears by the beauty of what they see. Some will feel a connection across the millennia, a recognition of shared humanity with the people who made these objects. Some will simply enjoy the spectacle, the gold and the grandeur, the exotic mystique of ancient Egypt. But all will leave changed in some small way, touched by the endurance of these ancient works, reminded that human creativity and ambition can create things that outlast the creators, that our brief lives can leave marks that endure for thousands of years. The pharaohs wanted to live forever. In the museums of the world, in the scholarship that studies their civilization, in the imaginations of millions who are fascinated by their achievements, they have succeeded, not as living gods maintaining cosmic order, but as inspirations, as reminders of what human civilization can achieve when it commits itself fully to creating beauty and meaning that will outlast mortal life. The museum keeps vigil through the night, protecting and preserving, guarding the inheritance of humanity's deep past, ensuring that the voices of the ancestors can still speak to those who come to listen. The pharaohs achieved immortality, just not the one they planned. Thank you for joining me on this long journey into the past. It has been a privilege to bring these calming chronicles to your evening. I hope these ancient narratives have helped ease your mind towards sleep, that the weight of the feather has balanced gently in your thoughts, that the eternal rhythms of the Nile and the enduring presence of the pyramids have carried you toward peaceful rest. The pharaohs built monuments that still stand after 45 centuries. They created a civilization that endured for 3,000 years. They left us treasures of art and architecture, of wisdom and writing, of ambition and achievement. And though their kingdom has long since passed into history, their legacy lives on in the museums and the scholarship, in the hieroglyphs that speak again after their long silence, in the mummies that preserve faces we can still recognize as human, as kin, as fellow travelers through time. May these stories have brought you comfort and calm. May the desert's patient quiet settle over you like sand over ancient ruins, preserving and protecting. May you find your rest in the knowledge that great civilizations have risen and fallen, that human creativity endures, that beauty outlasts empires, and that the eternal patterns, the rising sun, and the flowing river continue regardless of human drama. Rest well beneath the starlit skies of ancient nights.